This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10, and I think we're going to have a Brexit phone-in. Do you remember when we had them every day? Do you remember? I don't think we can look back on them as the good old days, can we? But we certainly felt like a bit of an oasis among the British media, even, sadly, on this radio station at the time. It was a little oasis of facts and evidence when so much emotion and feeling was running high. And I don't know, it might be a day for Keith to get the tin out. I went through a period of putting £1 in a tin every time I uttered the words "I told you so," but I've had to extinguish that project on the grounds of nearing bankruptcy as a result of having... And it didn't take particular intelligence or understanding to predict exactly what was going to happen. It just took really paying attention, being a third country, not being in the single market anymore, abolishing freedom of movement. I was talking about it the other day, and it's still the gym membership. That is still the best way to explain it. I was talking to Mark Steele about it, the comedian, for his podcast. I think it comes out tomorrow, in the highly unlikely event that you miss me over the course of the weekend and 16 hours a week of my company isn't enough. I'm including the Full Disclosure podcast, of course, in that figure. But there's still no better description of it, is there, than leaving the gym but somehow thinking you'd be able to pop back and use the treadmill or have a shower whenever you wanted. So you're no longer paying your membership fees, but you'd somehow still be able to avail yourself of many of the benefits of membership. There's no better explanation of it than that. And what they're doing today, what Kemi Badenoch is doing today, I don't know if you've heard any of her interviews. She's essentially saying, we're joining a new gym. It hasn't actually got much equipment and it's on the other side of the world, but it's really good. So this is what I found so hilarious about her round of interviews this morning. You cannot say anything. You cannot say a single thing about joining an Indo-Pacific trading bloc without silently saying Brexit was really, really stupid. There's literally nothing. Well, we'll be able to do more trade with more free trade, more tariff-free trade. Yeah, but we left the single market. We left the European Union. There's lots of other countries. Even she couldn't stop herself saying things like, well, there's strength in numbers. I don't know if she's seen a map. Strength in numbers. If you're allying yourself with somebody or something, what do you think is more helpful? To have an alliance with your next door neighbour, or to have an alliance with someone in Mongolia? Or Peru, actually, in this case. I don't even need to use Mongolia as a figure of speech today, because we are now joining a trading bloc that includes Peru. I've got nothing against Peru. One of my favourite general knowledge questions has always been, what is the capital of Peru? It's Lima, isn't it? I think it's Lima. But it's not very near. You look at the map now. I don't know what we're going to do today. I feel we have to talk about this. Right? We have to talk about this. Let me tell you 2 headlines in the Daily Telegraph today. Do you remember that politician called Liz Truss? Do you remember her? She was Prime Minister for 10 minutes. Was it this year or last year? Probably last. So I can't keep up anymore. Do you remember when the Daily Telegraph's experts and comment writers and opinion journalists were telling us how brilliant Liz Truss was? The finest budget of my lifetime. This is the future. Do you remember when that was happening? We all sat here. We've gone crackers as a country. Absolutely crackers. Because they're all still there. All of these people like David Blummin' Frost, who were queuing up to tell us that Liz Truss was the future. A budget of incendiary genius that almost brought the entire British economy to its knees. Well, they're back. These are genuine headlines. One on the front page, one on the comment pages. Someone called Ambrose Evans Pritchard writes, Britain's new Pacific trade bloc will leave EU in the dust. What is wrong with these people? There, that's the topic. There you go. Usually pops out at some point during my daily fulminations. Well, what is wrong with these people? Because here's the mad one. Here's David Frost. Listen to this, right? Genuine headline. In the United Kingdom in 2023, Remainers are convinced that Britain is irrelevant. They're set to be humiliated. The failure of basic comprehension displayed in that headline is almost beyond my powers to articulate how stupid that position is. If, like me, you think it was stupid to become the first country in the history of humanity to impose economic sanctions on itself, right? If you think that was a stupid thing to do, you dream of nothing more than damage limitation. You dream of nothing more than the United Kingdom somehow managing to fill some of the holes in our economy and trading capacity that have been blown by people like David Frost. The idea that if we somehow sign some good trade deals, it would be a humiliation for people who wish that we hadn't pulled out of the biggest trading bloc, the most successful trading bloc in history. I can't get my head around how stupid that is. Is it projection? Is it projection? Is his brain so boiled by Brexit that he thinks the people on the right side of history are just as stupid as he is? So he thinks we all sit here going, oh, I'd love to see Britain fail more, and that'll prove me even more right about... But I don't get it. I don't understand what is wrong with these people. 9 minutes after 10, 0345 606 0973. What is wrong with these people? Listen to Kemi Badenoch on Sky News earlier this morning, because you can hear it. The cat just begins to poke its head out of the bag. You just listen to the words that she uses to describe this trade deal that she is signing us up to that will do a fraction, a tiny, tiny fraction of what European Union membership used to do.
Well, it's the first time we've joined a bloc like this in about 50 years. There is strength in numbers.
What was the last one then?
Yes,
50 years ago? Strength in numbers, you say?
We have a relationship with the EU already. We've got an FTA. So this is adding to that.
It's an FTA that the OBR says hits GDP by 4%.
But the key thing is that more countries are joining, and we've got in early. So again, it's about that potential.
And guess which countries are joining? Countries in the region.
We had free trade agreements with those countries, but now 99% of our exports are going to be tariff-free. We didn't have that with the previous trade deals.
And 9 out of the 11 countries in it, we've already got trading agreements with already. I don't know. I can't do another phone-in for another Tory about whether or not they're stupid or dishonest. I just can't. I say, is she stupid? Does she not understand how stupid she is? Or is she just being dishonest? Because it could be a little bit of both. But I want to know what's wrong with these people. I tell you what, I'll calm down a bit. And you'll call me if you voted for Brexit, right? And you've seen the light, obviously. If you haven't, there's nothing I can do to help you now. And it doesn't matter. We're not going back in anytime soon. Labour Party aren't offering any particular sanctuary for reason and reality yet, although you have to presume that they will. I think you might be better placed to tell me what's wrong with these people. There's the idea that Remainers are convinced that Britain is irrelevant. They're set to be humiliated. That's David Frost. That's the man who negotiated the withdrawal agreement that Boris Johnson tried to disown before the ink on his own signature was dry. It's a catalogue of incompetence so complete that I genuinely struggle sometimes to believe that it's actually happened in real time on our watch in our country. Remainers are convinced that Britain is irrelevant. They're set to be humiliated. And Britain's new Pacific trade bloc will leave EU in the dust. And then the minister sent out to sell it is essentially, with every sentence she says, acknowledging the absurdity of Brexit. There's strength in numbers, so why leave the biggest single market in the world then? We'll be able to have free trade, so why leave the biggest single market in the world then? So why leave the single market then? Why leave the biggest single market in the world? It's very good for the economy, so why leave the... It's close to being beyond articulation this morning. It's why I nearly didn't talk about it. I heard that interview. I heard the one with Nick, actually. And I for the first time since this started, I just found myself thinking, I can't even today. I just can't do it. I just don't know what to say. You're still gaslighting us. You're still touring the studios, presenting another box and claiming that it's full of gold when, if we're lucky, it'll have a few coins in it. I don't know how it can still be happening. And I don't know what is wrong with these people. A comment on the Guardian website says, we've stormed out of the Ritz and stumbled into a Wetherspoons, which is apposite on so many levels, isn't it? So what's wrong with these people? Well, I mean, look, number one, if you want to talk about joining the Indo-Pacific trading bloc, that's great. Why bring Brexit into it? Why would you have to pretend that it's a benefit of Brexit? Rishi Sunak's Twitter account this morning. It's a 4% hit on GDP, right? According to the OBR. That's what leaving does. And signing this in 10 years' time will be a 0.08% boost. How can Rishi Sunak call that a Brexit benefit? It doesn't make any sense. None of it makes any sense. But you're going to make sense of it for me. So the question is, very simply, what is wrong with these people? Explain it to me. Maybe you're one of them. 0345 6060 973. Maybe your dad is. Is anyone genuinely celebrating this? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I think we'll go a little bit Marvin Gaye. I do allow myself occasionally a moment of Marvin Gaye. It's not actually as appropriate as I thought it was when I first started using the lyric, "What's Going On?" as a launch pad for a radio phone-in. But what is going on? Why do these people persist in pretending that up is down and black is white? How can anybody today be presenting this membership of an Indo-Pacific, there's a clue in the blooming name, an Indo-Pacific trading bloc, as somehow being a benefit of Brexit? Right, you tell me, what is wrong with these people? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And I almost feel I should apologise to you for a lack of clarity. I thought I'd have a theory by the time I got to the end of my introduction this morning. I can use the word cult a lot, particularly when I'm looking at a picture of David Frost. I know that there's something beyond politics going on here, something psychological. I thought that if I read that headline out 3 times, a penny might drop. Britain's new Pacific trade bloc will leave EU in the dust. Remainers are convinced that Britain is irrelevant. They're set to be humiliated. And these aren't just sort of, passing idiots. That's the bloke that negotiated the withdrawal agreement, the second headline. Let's just find out then. What is wrong with these people? And I should stress, you're perfectly entitled to answer nothing, James. It's you that's got this all wrong. I would enjoy that, I think. What is wrong with these people? 0345 6060 973. They've taken us out of the best gym in the world and signed us up to something in a garage in Peru. And they're trying to tell us that they've done us a solid. They've done us a favour. They've improved our lives. I don't get it anymore. And I want to hear from you if you think you do.
James O'Brien on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
10:18 is the time. And I wonder whether there is actually a crowd anymore. You know, so much of Brexit has been about crowd pleasing. The way that the cheerleaders are writing today, talking about Remainers are set to be humiliated and the EU will be left in the dust. It's pathetic. It's why I'm so confused by it. Who is the enemy here? And yet, who are the allies? Who's in the crowd of people cheering this? Kemi Badenoch didn't even sound like she meant it, touring the studios this morning, using phrases like strength in numbers and trade agreement. I don't get it anymore. I don't understand why they don't just either stop talking about it or start being a little bit more honest. So I will persist with the question. What is maybe what's wrong is a bit loaded. But I can't think of a better way of phrasing it. What is wrong with these people? If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. I maybe, like me, you're suffering from fatigue. This is the slowest switchboard on a Brexit-related subject that I can remember seeing in a very, very long time. Maybe nobody's got an answer to the question. What is wrong with these people? And nobody's cheering them either. We've hit the point now where I said to you, listening to that interview this morning, I said to you, I can't even today. I just can't do it. But I've tried. Maybe you don't want to. We'll find out. But anyway, if you hit the numbers now, you will get through. Mark's in Shoreham to kick things off. Mark, what's going on?
Hiya. It's a bit of a long story. Me and the wife came from Sweden. Just before Brexit, I had to get her back into the country before it all kicked off to make sure that she could get back into the country. I've been staying in Sweden. I married her in Sweden.
Okay.
So we came back. I was into the Brexit thing. I thought it was a good idea when I thought the UK would be standing on its own 2 feet and just sort of grabbing the reins for itself.
Yeah.
And I've just seen it all fall apart. Nobody's had any plan or anything at all. No. This thing about joining the new bloc, my stepdaughter, who's in Sweden,
right,
she's trying to get into the UK for an internship.
Okay.
But it's now going to cost her an absolute fortune. And if she falls out of a job, she'll be back out of the country in 60 days if she doesn't get another job.
Pretty
so
brutal.
It's all a bit messy.
Has she forgiven you? Has she forgiven you for your vote, Mark?
Or
did you not tell her?
what triggered me, well, I did. She knew that I was up for it originally.
Right.
But it was her response yesterday. I got a call from her saying about this new bloc joining, and she could not believe the stupidity involved to join a bloc
it's
so
not
many thousands of miles.
Yeah, it's not a stupid thing to do per se, I don't think. I don't think it's not stupid to join. What is stupid is to pretend that it is going to somehow humiliate Remainers or leave the EU trailing in the dust. And I don't understand what's wrong with those people who have to make these points.
I would definitely reverse it this evening. It's something that I swallowed my pride because I was all for it originally.
Yeah, good for you.
And it's you'll
get no jip from me. Imagine you were still on the horse then, Mark, if you would. You were still all for it. What? Maybe I don't know if anyone's going to be able to answer this question today. Actually, I really don't. What would you be doing now? What would you actually be celebrating?
I have no idea.
I have no idea either.
I've got to say, I have absolutely no idea. There isn't anything within Brexit that has grabbed me and said, look, this is better now.
No.
That's
what they're trying to do. That's why this morning it's so hilarious. And they're trying to say this is better. Joining the same bloc that Peru is in is better than being in the most successful single market in history that we were in the middle of and a key member of.
It just seems like a pride thing. They just do not want to reverse it because...
But then I'd keep quiet.
Fingers in the pie that don't want that reversed.
Maybe it is. Maybe it's just sunk cost fallacy. They're just queuing up to say, the unicorns will be here any minute now. And they're pretending this is a unicorn. It could be that simple. It's just pretending it's a unicorn. There's a donkey over there with an ice cream cone stuck to its head. That's the trade deal that we're going in on, but they're calling it a unicorn. And it's going to leave the EU in the dust. What is going on? What is wrong with these people? Lakar is in Leytonstone. Lakar, what would you like to say? Thank you, Mark.
I've just been listening to you, James, and I kind of understand where you're coming from. But look,
I know where I'm coming from, mate. Where are these people coming from? That's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
So leaving in the dust comment is a little bit too far. I agree with that. But having said that, we have to make a start from somewhere.
We've got deals already with 9 of these 11 countries.
Correct, but imagine a bloc coming together, which has a great potential.
Yes.
We might not see them as big as EU currently
on the other side of the world.
Which is fine.
Yes.
Which is absolutely fine.
Because when I need a plumber, the first thing I do is get out the Peruvian yellow pages.
That's not the trade deal which we are looking at, right?
Right.
We are looking at much more goods rather than services.
Yep, they've taken tariffs off palm oil. Kemi Badenoch on Sky News this morning trying to tell us that palm oil is a good thing when every environmental charity on the planet talks about how it wipes out the rainforest and kills off orangutans.
I agree with you, but it takes time. Nothing gets built in a day. You start from a scratch.
Oh, come on.
You know what? When we joined EU, that was the same situation. You start from the scratch, you join in, you build your relationship.
Have you been sponsored to make this phone call? Are you raising money for a worthy cause?
Definitely not.
Then you mean you're doing it from a sense. I mean, you cannot sit here and pretend at 25 past 10 on a Friday morning that there is any. If these were scales, Lakar, if these were scales, and you had European Union membership on one side of the scale, and you and CPP, whatever it is, membership on the other side of the scale, you would now be heading towards the stratosphere. The speed with which the other side of the scales had plummeted downwards and had shot you up in the air, you'd be landing on the moon by about 10:30 this morning.
I understand your point of view, but you need to let me speak, right?
It's not a point of view. I am letting you speak, and you're driving me potty.
The only reason I call, I've never called, I'm a huge fan of Nick, but the only reason I called is because I'm just driving my wife to the GP and I listen to you, and I can understand your point of view. But again, we've come out of EU, right? Yes. What do you want to do?
Go back in again.
Yeah, but the problem is, do you think we'll be treated very fairly? Do you think we'll get the same? Exactly the point. Neither can you. Neither can you.
All right.
And can I assure that we will get the same team?
No, of course we won't. We'll go in on much worse terms than we came out on. That's one of the ultimate ironies of Brexit. But just in a sentence, then, if you were selling this, perhaps, what would you put on the side of the bus then for this trade deal?
It's simple.
Yeah.
Wait. It's not. Nothing is going to happen in a short term.
Okay.
You need to wait. And people who think you're going to reap the benefits of Brexit in a year's time or 2 years' time, no.
So what benefits can we wait for then in 10 years?
20 years.
20 years. What benefits are you most looking forward to?
I think Britain will be a much, much better economy than what it was before we came out.
Why?
But it will take 20 years.
Why?
Because you will get better trade deals during the time. You will get a better movement of people across that time. But it's going to take time. It's not going to happen in a year's time.
Well, I'm glad I've managed to stay polite. Frankly, it's a miracle. So in 20 years' time, things will be better. I can't tell you how or why, but you just need... Well, I mean, what you need to do, Lakar, if I've understood you correctly, we just need to believe a little bit more, don't we? And then all the good stuff will start happening.
Just have a little bit of patience.
Have a bit of faith. Just believe in it a little bit more. Just that. If you believe it a little bit more, that donkey over there with an ice cream cone stuck to its forehead will actually turn into a unicorn. And 20 years from now, we'll be riding it all the way to the sunlit uplands. God save us all. Sabina's in Kings Hill. Sabina, what would you like to say?
Oh, James, I just heard all this, and I just want to go under the table and just with it.
Yes, me too. I can't, though, can I? I've got a bloody microphone in front of me.
Okay, well, James, I was one of these idiots. I'm so sorry, but I was an idiot. I voted for Brexit at the time.
Right.
And I wish I didn't, because at the time, I always thought it wasn't about people coming over here and freedom of movement. It was about this so-called parliament, sovereignty. We had sovereignty. And I'm thinking, I'm just doing a law degree, and I'm in this module called Constitutional and Administrative Law.
It's a bit late now. It's a bit late now, Sabina.
James, I mean, what I wanted to say to you guys is this: to everybody, listen. Parliament has always had sovereignty in our constitution. We're one of those rare constitutions which, through history, we've made our laws and everything.
This sounds like a repeat of one of my shows from 2017.
Oh my God! Yeah, but I wasn't around.
No, fair enough. So, can you have a go then? Having obviously, unlike the last chap, seen the light. What's wrong with these people? What's wrong, particularly these two? Remainers are convinced that Britain is irrelevant. They're set to be humiliated, and Britain's new Pacific trade bloc will leave EU in the dust. What's wrong with these people?
What's wrong with me as well at the time?
Yeah.
I just didn't know the facts. Guys, it's not Parliament. Our sovereignty has always been. We enacted the law in the European Union Act in 1970, whatever it was, 8.
Yes, of course we did. We left as well.
Take it back. Exactly. So our Parliament has the power to do whatever it wants to do, but it can also take whatever it wants to do.
It can also take us into a trading bloc with no referendum or with no vote at all. I mean, that's the maddest thing, actually. We've got halfway through the first hour of the programme. We've only just stumbled into that simple statement of fact that this is being done without permission. This is being done, and we have to then abide by rules that are set over there. For full accession, you've got to prove to the other members that you're going to be abiding by whatever regulations and standards they have in place for various goods and products. Sabina, thank you for your honesty. I'm not sure that you would have managed to breach the previous caller's confidence, but I guess that's great, isn't it? I mean, it'd be fine. I wish my wife would let me get away with stuff like that. I'm going to mow the lawn in 20 years, and it'll actually be better when I mow it in 20 years' time than it is now. So you just got to put up with an unmown lawn for 20 years, and trust me on this, I just know it. You've got to believe more. Then it'll start mowing itself. Give it 20 years. It's like those people who used to say you don't have to wash your hair. If you never wash your hair, it'll start cleaning itself after 6 months. Just wait for 20 years. That's Lakar's advice. 20 years, and the lawn will start mowing itself. That big donkey over there with a whopping great ice cream cone stuck to its forehead will actually miraculously turn into a unicorn. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
This is LBC with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
It is 10:34. You may have missed this. The head of the government's own economic watchdog has described Brexit this month as being as bad for the economy, at least as bad as COVID or the energy crisis. The big difference being, of course, that it's self-inflicted. So I think today is a watershed moment, actually. I think, those of us who are clear about what needs to happen, you can't start fixing problems until you admit there are problems, right? So that's why you get still people saying, we need to wait 20 years to see the benefit. That's just, with respect, it's just daft. Everyone knows it's daft. Even the people saying it know it's daft. But the hope that perhaps the process of acknowledging reality would begin sooner rather than later seems to me to be seeping away on a day like today. Because Rishi Sunak, whose main claim to fame is not going to work drunk every day, just as a figure of speech. If you had a boss who was drunk every day, whoever replaced him or her would seem like an improvement, right? Look, I don't care how bad he is, at least he's not plastered all the time. So that's Rishi Sunak's chief qualification for being Prime Minister. The previous two holders of that job were drunk all the time, metaphorically speaking. Actually, not just metaphorically. If you look at the amount of wine that was shipped into Downing Street while the rest of us weren't even allowed to visit our dying relatives in care homes. So that's part of today. That's why these people, who don't seem to exist outside of the Daily Telegraph's comment pages anymore, even my switchboard fails these days to find any. Why do they have to talk about it, leaving the EU in the dust and humiliating Remainers? It's beyond pathetic. But there must be some answers to it that go a little bit further than simple stupidity or delusion. And if you've got an answer, the number you need is 0345 6060 973. I wasn't imagining the bit about palm oil. So palm oil, quite a lot of environmentally conscious people will avoid products that contain palm oil because of the damage that they do to rainforests. You chop stuff down to grow the crop from which you get the oil. Orangutans particularly suffer. You might not care about orangutans. The sort of environmental equivalent of people say, well, I don't care about losing my freedom of movement. I don't want to go to France. It just so boneheaded positioning. But this is Kemi Badenoch this morning.
Well, so what about palm oil from Malaysia
Yes.
then, for example? Palm oil obviously is seen to be responsible for destroying habitats, being very bad for the environment. You're saying that there won't be lower tariffs on palm oil coming into this country?
There are. That's what happens. You have to make trade-offs. But we take in already just about 1%. I think it's actually slightly less than 1% of Malaysian palm oil exports. Moving the tariff from 2% to 0% is not what's going to cause deforestation. And actually, the standards which are set by this government, by the Department for the Environment, is what's going to dictate what comes into the country. But also being in the trade bloc means that you're going to have more influence on sustainability. Palm oil is actually a great product. It's in so many of the things we use. This is not some illegal substance we're talking about. And actually, there are other crops in the EU that are causing deforestation that fit within EU rules. So we need to do what is right for our country and make the decisions which are going to be of benefit to the future and help to influence those things that we want to change. So I think it's still overall a very good thing.
Talking to Sky News earlier, it's gibberish. It is absolute gibberish. We should be setting higher environmental standards for palm oil imports. We shouldn't be taking this stuff from, and we're actually going to make it easier. We're going to start taking more. And she's trying to sell it as a benefit. It is quite incredible. I like that storming out of the Ritz and ending up in a Wetherspoons. It's such a great way of putting it. Because there'll be plenty of people, I'd rather be in a Wetherspoons than the Ritz. And you sort of think, yeah, fine. But I wish you hadn't handcuffed yourself to me before you did it. Hassan's in Surrey Quays. Hassan, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I think I'm going to draw a parallel here because I feel like a lot of callers don't really fully grasp this. So I'm going to draw a parallel here. If these conservative Brexit championeers, if these were company directors, particularly if they were working in business development, right?
Yeah.
And
oh, no, I was enjoying... hang on, I think the phone line went a bit. Go back. Go, where are you?
I'm going to stand closer to the windows. It's clearer.
Yeah, that's nicer.
Yeah, sorry.
I can see you now.
If these people were working in a company, right, and they were to deliver poor advice and loose contracts and such, they would be fired. Their careers would be over, right? Particularly if they were in such high-profile roles. And that's the problem is we don't understand that these people, right?
That's it. You share my failure to comprehend almost this idea. I mean, looking at these two people in the Telegraph today, one of whom actually negotiated the withdrawal agreement. They were all cheerleading for Liz Truss, telling us that mini budget of Kwasi Kwarteng's was absolutely brilliant. And they're still in their jobs. They're still getting paid to give us their opinions. And in this case, on this trading block.
I don't understand how some of these people are still in their jobs. I don't understand how someone like Liz Truss will still get paid £110,000 a year for serving a moment in the Prime Minister's office. It's just this.
And there he is.
Really
He stepped away from the window again. That's it. That's part. I mean, you're not answering my question. You're merely clarifying the urgency of the question. Is what is wrong with these people? Part of the problem, actually, as Hassan perfectly identifies, part of it is the absence of consequences. The complete absence of consequences. Writing articles about how Liz Truss is going to be brilliant. Pause, inhale, breathe out. Write an article about how joining an Indo-Pacific trading bloc is going to humiliate Remainers. Why are they still doing it? Loz is in Plymouth. Loz, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Loz.
Lies, dishonesty and gaslighting of a nation, and they're that consumed by it, James, they cannot stop.
Well, that's the bit, isn't it? Right there. That's the bit. Why can't they stop?
They can't stop because they consider that there's still a majority within the English electorate that will vote for them because they read the right-wing rags and they believe everything that they read and everything that the Tories tell them.
But they can't believe. Look at Kemi Badenoch this morning. Every sentence she said, if you were applying it to the single market or to the European Union, becomes 10, 20, 30 times more pertinent and powerful than when it's applied to an Indo-Pacific trading bloc. She must understand that. Surely she understands that.
Well, she does understand it, James, but all she's got is lies because they follow the Johnson mantra, and that's the way they operate, and it's going to get worse up until and after, throughout the next election campaign. Another thing, James.
Go on. Don't get cross with me, Loz.
No, never, James. On that 2016 ballot paper, James,
yes,
when we voted to either remain or leave,
yes,
did it say anything about joining an Indo-Pacific trading bloc?
No,
it didn't.
So it didn't.
Where's the referendum for this?
Don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's not. They've moved from fetishising control to fetishising surrendering control. And Kemi Badenoch's wrong as well about a lot of what she was saying about standards and us being able to influence them. And what if China joined next year? Where does that leave our suspicious relationship with China? Is just banning people from using TikTok. It is a big day, this. Obviously you share my frustrations. What does the light at the end of the tunnel look like for you? Just a complete change of government and then a slow crawl back to some semblance of competence?
I'll tell you what I noticed, and aside, James, I said to your researcher, what I've noticed the last few weeks, I've been watching Question Time, and I've noticed, I know it's weighted towards the current political landscape.
Yes, it is.
And what I've noticed, James, is that more and more members of the audience are getting very hostile towards members of the Tory party and the right-wing media. Last night, only one person raised their hand in support of the Rwanda policy, and the Tory panel got demolished.
I missed that.
One person, James.
Well, the polling suggests it's not landing. I don't know if you saw the latest development in that particular policy, that the Home Office has confirmed that they will, I can only use the phrase, manhandle children who don't want to be deported. That they will use robust, whatever you call it. So we'll be frog marching children onto planes to fly them to Africa, even if they've fled Afghanistan or Iran or places like that. I don't think it is landing, but I'm old enough now and cynical enough to always add the word yet on that. Always add the word. Yeah, people are still cheering for Donald Trump, even as they're preparing the handcuffs for him. Thank you, Loz. Patrick's in Newcastle. Patrick, what's going on? What's going on?
As an 83-year-old, always been a pro-European. Yes. Everything that I predicted is coming true, so I'm echoing everything that you said.
Well, talk to me about these people who don't agree with us. What's going on in their heads?
Well, I'll tell you what's going on. They're like rabbits caught in the headlight.
Yes.
And they are cornered. They are so cornered that all they're doing is, with egg on their face, they're just trying to justify their decisions.
So it's desperation.
It's totally in desperation. Yes. They'll lie in any way possible to make out that they were right and we were wrong.
It's going to be great. We're going to get more palm oil from Malaysia. It's fantastic.
It's amazing,
great news.
Isn't it? And has anybody thought about, trunking and the travelling and the carriage costs and the damage to the economy, the environment, dragging all this stuff across the world? I mean, it's so obvious. I mean, you are just speaking the obvious all the time.
I know.
You don't have to convince me. I was convinced from day one.
Do you recognise what Loz described? Do you sense that the oil tanker is beginning to turn around?
I'd love to think it.
Yeah,
I'd love to think it, but the my only disappointment is that Labour haven't come out as positive as they could. So they're losing all the young voters, everybody that matters in the future, like my kids and my grandkids. They're going to lose out because of the lack of guts of this government and the people that really feel their truth, the way they really believe, but can't say it because they'll either lose their positions, lose their face, and it's just a case of holding hands up and saying I was wrong. Have you ever seen a politician do that? Very occasionally. With your experience, you may have.
Once or twice, I think. But, I mean, it's not on a. I suppose the Iraq War, maybe some people have reversed their support for that. But you're right, that's why today feels different. Actually, it feels odd today. There's a point at which you just sort of think, this is beyond parody now. This is beyond reasonable analysis. This is just people queuing up to tell us that a pig's ear is a silk purse. Almost literally, a sow's ear is a silk purse. Thank you, Patrick. The time is 10:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 minutes to 11, and it's a strange day. I don't know if you can tell, but my I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. I don't know what I think today. It's an odd one. I can't quite articulate. It's not fury because there's too much frustration, there's too much bewilderment. It's a moment of, I don't know, it's a moment of unwanted clarity about just how broken we are, just how mad this is. You've got people marching up and down the right-wing newspapers and a government minister touring the studios telling us that joining a trading bloc with 11 countries on the other side of the world is fantastic news and proof that Brexit was a good idea, despite the fact that the financial impact of it will be negligible. And we already had trading agreements with 9 out of 11 of those countries. And, of course, it means we'd have to, in many ways, follow their rules. It is just baffling. The number you need is 03456060973 if you want to talk to me about what motivates these people. Should we have a look in Idiot's Corner? Here's Tony in Church Langley. I'm just listening to you and your Romaniac callers who haven't got a clue. Tony, when people ring in and say, I voted for Brexit, and then explain the circumstances under which they've come to regret their idiocy, to use their own words, that you can't then text the radio programme and say, I'm listening to you and your Romaniac callers. Do you see why that's really thick, Tony? Probably you don't. The Indo-Pacific Basin is an area of huge economic growth. The EU is contracting and you can't even understand that. Yeah. So, Tony in Church Langley, your local shop, right? Let's imagine it shuts down a couple of aisles, but a shop in Kuala Lumpur opens 10 new branches. That's good, right? Yeah, you're going to open up a trading arrangement with the supermarkets in Kuala Lumpur, are you? Good grief! Stay away from scissors. George is in Southend-on-Sea. George, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James. Don't be nervous. It's only me.
Get on with it.
Answer your question. The current group of politicians, basically...
It's a terrible phone line. I'm going to try and sort your phone line out, and then I'll come back to you. Meanwhile, Rob's in Maidstone. Rob, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
I'm a little concerned. Did you have breakfast this morning?
No, I don't. I never eat breakfast. I like to come on air hungry.
I think you're missing the blatantly obvious.
I think I know what you're going to say. And I would warn you that whenever people accuse me of missing the blatantly obvious, Rob, it rarely goes well for them.
I know that, but we've done this before, and the last time I was right, so we'll try again. By joining a trading bloc on the other side of the planet, Brexit gets done because it makes it virtually impossible for us ever to rejoin the EU.
That was an article written by Shankham, someone who works for the IEA in the Telegraph, either yesterday or the day before. It's already been completely deconstructed.
Well, I read that, but what's the Brexit?
It's just not true.
But look at David Frost and look at Cumming Badenhorst, and this will be their next one for winding up their base.
Well, you can't just jump off the horse you rode in on. It will be just as easy to leave it as it would be to join it. There's absolutely no merit whatsoever in the argument that it makes Brexit rejoining impossible.
We first have to leave, and then we'd have to restart the whole EU thing. And can you see the British voting public wanting to go through another? We need to leave something to start something else.
They're not even going to notice that we've joined. That's the whole point about the 0.08% boost to GDP over 10 to 15 years. It's not. You're giving them far too much credit, Rob. But never mind. No one can be right all the time. George is in Southend-on-Sea. Where were we, George?
Well, to try and answer your question,
Yes.
is the line any better?
Yes, it's infinitely better.
Excellent. Well, the current group of politicians, they're looking on the horizon and they're thinking we may lose power. And when the reckoning comes, they're thinking that Brexit will be listed among the other failures that they've produced.
Yeah.
And what they're telling us now is that, look, we've unleashed the unicorns. They are coming your way.
Don't look too closely at them.
Don't look too closely at them, but they will be fine. And that's, first of all, the point I'd like to make.
I like that point because hang on, it fills some of the available space. If you are a bit stupid, like our friend in Church Langley, this is something. If you're going out knocking on doors and banking on people not paying attention, you can say, "No, this is great. We've joined the Indo-Pacific trading bloc, and that's fantastic." It's only people who understand things that are going to turn around and say, "Oh, shut up." Whereas what they need is just something that they can point to, or something they can pretend to believe in, or something they can shout out as they lean out of the back window of a bus.
Absolutely.
Well done.
Can I go on to thank you and tell you off one after the other? Is that okay?
I'm not into the self-referential stuff, George. I see myself merely as a cipher through which all contributors pass. Go on then, quickly.
Okay, so thank you, because you recommended a really good book, Democracy for Sale by Peter Geoghegan, and it explains how all these little interest groups get the power to overthrow democracy and bypass democracy. And the other thing is, you're possibly too kind to people sometimes.
I agree.
Because I'm no genius, I'm no economic or political guru, but like you said at the beginning of your show, many of the things, the pitfalls of Brexit were quite obvious to me.
Yes.
And it's in this country, I've got a real gripe about people not paying attention or caring enough about what's going on.
Well, you can't have it both ways. You've read Peter's book, which explains how people can be so effectively bamboozled or misled. So that's why I have sympathy for them.
Yeah, there is that, but take your other point you made today.
Go on.
About this.
Don't know that I'm going to encourage this deconstructing of the show while it's still on air, but I'll make an exception this morning. Go on.
It's just that when you just consider with importing things 7,000 miles away instead of 200 miles away, that should be an obvious for everyone, shouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I mean, yes. But I think you can say it's not going to be goods, it's going to be services, perhaps. But then why is she talking about palm oil?
Anyway, there's a little quote I'll leave you with.
Thank you, George.
The price good be.
I can't believe the phone line's gone right in the middle of his pithy quote. You couldn't make it up. We'll never know. Tell the producer what the quote is, and I'll get it put on my screen and read it out. I can't risk that phone line going. And Russell's in Birmingham. Russell, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Unfortunately, I think these idiots running the country, they actually do believe this, and this is part of it's the result of the purge. It's a Tory party, but is it really a Tory party?
It's a weird Brexit values. Boris Johnson tribute group, isn't it? It's
a bit of a cult. It's a bit of a cult, and by getting rid of anybody who thought Remain was a good idea, any organisation, business or political party, if everyone only has one idea and you get rid of anyone else with a different idea, you will eventually all believe and think that what you're saying is actually true.
So it's a remarkable thing you describe. It's a country that created a political ecosystem in which being wrong about the biggest issue of the era was grounds for promotion. It was a prerequisite for promotion. And at the very least, you had to pretend that you agreed with it. So Jeremy Hunt being Chancellor, for example, Liz Truss, who campaigned against it. So at the very least, you have to sort of recant your previous support. But the biggest acceleration of a political career in the United Kingdom after 2019 was being spectacularly wrong about the most important post-war policy the country has ever seen. It's
and this
amazing.
Is where
that,
Led by Donkeys highlight very well people's previous opinions until it came for, I can get an actual, ministerial position. Well, I'll revert back on everything I've said about being a Remainer and the benefits and the dangers of leaving. But now that I can go from a junior minister to an actual cabinet position, well, of course, Brexit a great idea. And then it's the King's Close, where all of a sudden you're stood naked on a balcony, and the penny will drop. The penny will drop at some point, but
they'll be long gone.
They'll
be long gone when the penny.
The country or.
No, I don't know, actually. Farage said he was going to leave the country, didn't he, if Brexit, but I don't think the man's ever told the truth in his life, so the fact that he's still here could have been predicted just as ploddingly and as easily as the sundry other so-called benefits of Brexit coming to absolutely naught. I quite enjoyed that. I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't enjoy it as much as I used to. I've got a weird sense inside me today. I don't know why. I don't know what it is. I've told you several times I can't fully articulate what it is that I'm feeling. It's something about the cheerleading this bag of bones is just a new level of absurdity, of pitiful behaviour. But we have got quite a lot of other things to get through, so we may move on next, we may not. You better stay tuned to find out.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Three minutes after 11, by way of a postscript to the last hour, quite a few of you have sent me footage of George Eustice, the former farming minister and member of UKIP, warning against rushing into deals like the one that Cami Badenoch is touring the studios touting today on the grounds that it could involve surrendering our hard-won sovereignty, which, of course, our earlier caller, who is now studying constitutional law, having made the grave mistake of voting for Brexit, reminded us earlier we never actually lost. The UK Parliament was always sovereign. On we go. Right, a complete change of pace now. I need to set this up right. Last time I erred into this territory, I ended up going viral by accident. So joking about how my job is much harder than working on a building site. And it got clipped up and put out. And of course, foolishly, I forgot how desperate people are to believe anything bad about people they don't like. So a few nasty people sort of cast it as me genuinely telling you, as I had builders in at home at the time, and they'd had the show on. I thought they were going to start throwing slates at me from the roof, but they were bright enough to understand what was going on, unlike some of the idiots on Twitter. So we're going to talk about the difference between office work and manual work for a reason that I think is going to take you by surprise. But I had to then get the other clip put out of me making it clear that I was joking, just for the benefit of the very hard of thinking. So let's not necessarily go down that road again today. This is a headline that probably made you do a double take if you've seen it already today. The idea is that people who have performed physically demanding roles over many years should be allowed to get their pension earlier than people who haven't done physically demanding roles over many years. It's a suggestion, essentially, that office workers will have to wait longer to get their state pension than people in physically demanding jobs. It's an official review. It's only at the proposal stage. Frankly, I'd be surprised if it happened. But I want to know what you think about it, because I think it's a really good idea. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. I don't know how many of us will be able to live on the state pension by the time we actually reach pensionable age. But if you look at the health impact and the life expectancy of different jobs, it's a very unfair playing field, pension provision. If you've worked your fingers to the bone to the age of 60 odd, you're going to have a shorter retirement than someone who has not had a physically demanding job. I don't have a massively complex analysis of this suggestion. I just really want to know what you think about it. And if you are an office worker and you're aggrieved by this, I want to hear from you. If you are a manual labourer and you're patronised by it, I want to hear from you. Or if, like me, you're neither of those things, but you think it has an air of natural justice to it. And then we'll have a look at the feasibility of it. So you'll know a little bit more about the world than I do, and you'll be able to tell me whether or not this is actually going to be feasible. I mean, how would you prove it, for example? How would you prove that you'd had a lifetime of really hard manual labour? So let's not, because as I mentioned, that Brexit, the latest Brexit story has left me feeling a bit discombobulated for reasons I don't fully understand. So let's just do this like a traditional phone-in. I've told you a story. Office staff face a longer wait for their pensions than manual workers. At first glance, that seems to me to be quite fair. I worked on a building site for 2 weeks in 1988, and I've still got the scars to prove it. I've never been as physically exhausted as I was at the end of that working day. I would get back to where I was staying, I'd have a huge dinner, and I would fall asleep. I didn't have a beer. I was only 16, but I wouldn't have a beer, or I just would fall asleep. I'd every single day get in off the site when it goes dark, back to the house, big plate of scran, fast asleep. I couldn't. It was incredible. I'd never been that exhausted in my life, and I was in my prime. I was 16, so I find it outwardly quite a nice idea, quite a reasonable idea. But I'm still not really thinking about retiring just yet. I'm not really across the finances of it. I won't be relying on the state pension. So there could be all sorts of hiccups and loopholes to this proposal that you are now going to point out to me. It's 8 minutes after 11. The story is fairly straightforward. There's a drop-off. I mean, we're in a bit of a mess, I have to tell you this, with the delay coming in on hiking the state pension age because there's been such a sharp drop in life expectancy. And that's pretty grim as well. I don't fully understand that, but the average life expectancy since it was last reviewed in 2017 has dropped off by 2.8 years for men and 2.6 years for women. So they've delayed an increase in the pension age because we're dying sooner. So we run a risk of pensioners bankrupting Britain at some point. So this would be another way, perhaps, of postponing that pension age, but only for white-collar workers. I think I like this idea, but it is perfectly possible that there are myriad flaws and problems with it that you're going to point out to me by dialing 0345 6060 973. It's a change to rules that would let manual workers access their pot earlier than everybody else. I'd also like to hear from you if you've done both jobs. And your perspective in many ways would probably be the fairest. So you have done manual labour and you have done office work, and you're actually a little bit outraged by the idea that if you'd only done the office work, you'd have to work for even longer than you would if you'd only done the manual labour. Just comparing the two. It's a different type of tired. So when I come off air at 1 o'clock, I am often tired. Almost always tired, actually. Tired in a way that I wouldn't be when I was working in a shop all day, for example. A different sort of tiredness. But the health outcomes or the health impacts appear to suggest that you're more likely to suffer health impacts after a lifetime of manual labour than you are after a lifetime of white-collar labour. Wealthier people, of course, also have many more years of retirement in good health, as Julie reminds us. So I remember when firefighters they're not in the news today for all the wrong reasons, a horrible story about misogyny and all sorts of sexism going on in fire stations up and down the country. It doesn't lend itself to a phone-in, if you're wondering why, because when we do the police, it's about how members of the public have been impacted by it. So for every 3 calls I get from a member of the public, I'll get a call from a police officer. This one would just involve fire officers ringing in to share stories of grim treatment in fire stations, homophobia, sexism, all that kind of thing. So I don't think it works as a phone-in at first glance. I may change my mind, but I remember talking to firefighters about the government trying to shift their terms and conditions. And they pointed out to me that they would be physically incapable of doing the job long before they reached the state pension age, which I think ties into this idea that people with hard manual work would retire earlier than people sitting filing their nails in the office all day. Ian's in Coates in Gloucestershire. Ian, what would you like to say?
Well, I've got some good experience on this because I worked for 20 years in an office.
Right.
And my career stopped working out for me. So I decided, after moving around a couple of other office jobs, I decided to start working for myself as a general handyman. And now I'm going around doing general painting and decorating, but also doing things like fencing, which is very hard manual labour, digging
post holes and things like that. And I can honestly tell you, I'm tired after an up day at the office, but I'm bone tired. So your body is tired after a day's physical graft.
Yeah, of course it is.
And I can feel my body is aging quicker.
How old are you?
49 now.
Oh, it's pretty much the same age. It's the knees, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's my shoulder, actually.
Is it? Well, be careful, because that might be specific to a certain action that you're doing.
Yeah, I am keeping an eye on it. I mean, today I'm laying out some bark chippings in a children's playground.
So lugging. I mean, lugging. Are you enjoying it? Are you glad? Are you pleased with the life change in other ways?
Yeah, because actually, although you're bone tired, I think certainly emotionally I'm better, because one of the reasons I left was because of anxiety.
Yeah.
So that's a lot better than it was.
Oh, that's good.
And there is a strange sort of pleasure you get from being bone tired, where you've it's probably endorphins being released as you work hard. It's probably why people go to the gym and get addicted to the gym.
Yeah, of course it is. Well, I mean, listen to me. I don't know why people go to the gym, but that seems like a perfectly plausible reason to me. So what do we think about this proposal then? Because you're very well placed to comment.
I think it's a very good idea because, I mean, I probably won't be as affected by somebody. If somebody started in the building trade when they were left school at 16 or 18 and did it the whole life, they're going to be twice as affected as I am, starting at age 45.
Yeah.
And they're going to have a much more significant impact on the quality of the life. Because
there'd have to be a threshold.
Like that.
Yeah, there'd have to be a threshold. You couldn't knock it on the head at 60 and go and start work as a scaffolder and then retire early because you've been a scaffolder for 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. You'd have to factor it somehow.
You've got your tax returns and your employment record or whatever it is, haven't you?
Yeah. But and then there's the difficult to prove thing, because I'm a general handyman. They could say, "Well, what have you been doing?"
Yeah, that's true.
Well, I do a bit of everything.
Yeah. Some days you might just be painting a fence.
Yeah, some days you'll be just painting a fence.
And other days you're putting it up. You're going to be a lot more tired after putting it up than you are after painting it. Although painting can be quite exhausting as well. Okay.
Yeah, but I like
some
that. Days I put up IKEA furniture.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that's very. We got someone to do ours last time because I did a wardrobe once, put the door on upside down. Thank you, Ian. I like it. Who doesn't like it? I'm looking for angry office workers, really. I wonder how they feel. This is strong from Mick. Of all the jobs you see people doing, scaffolding must be one of the most physically demanding and also frightening. I mean, swinging around. When you see the putting it up, there's loads in Covent Garden at the moment. I'm always slightly awed by scaffolders, but I'm always terrified of being behind a scaffolding truck. I've just got a real fear of... Anyway, what am I winging on about? Mick's in County Durham. He says, I've been a scaff for 40 years. I'm 58 now. I need a new knee and a new hip, and I find every lift and step I take painful, James. I've never worked with computers or with paperwork, and the thought of working on until I'm 68 or more and then dying with ill health fills me with horror. I think this is a bit feudal, you know. I think that the system should be changed to accommodate the simple acknowledgement that hard physical graft for an entire lifetime should reach pension pot stage sooner than someone sitting behind a desk all day. I genuinely think it. I'm not just sucking up to Mick. It's 11:15.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC with James O'Brien.
18 minutes after 11, you couldn't make it up. Chapter 5362. Kemi Badenoch has asked the media to stop talking about Brexit because people keep pointing out how awful it is and how ridiculous it is to claim that the CPTPP deal will somehow compensate for EU trade loss. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak tweeted this morning, this is what we can achieve when we unleash the benefits of Brexit, while talking about the CPTPP trade deal. So there it is. I mean, you make sense of that if you've still got your little British Bulldog flag waving around and a picture of Nigel Farage on your fridge. You make sense of that for me. She's saying, oh, stop talking about Brexit, and he's pretending it's actually a benefit of Brexit. Do they not talk to each other? Do they? I give up. I don't give up. 90 minutes after 11. When am I going to give up work? I don't know, frankly. Sometimes I can't fancy following Eddie Mair. and knocking off a little earlier than expected, spending more time with Mrs. O'Brien, doing a bit of travelling, that kind of thing. And then I think about you and how bereft you'd be if I wasn't here every day. It'd be also, no one would put up with Keith. He'd be out on his ear by tea time. So I don't know, but I'm incredibly blessed to have a job that I'd probably do for free if the opportunity arose. So it's one of those areas where I don't have much to draw on personally, which is why I'm relying on you. Should you be able to retire earlier if you have spent your life grafting, manual labour, hard physical work, than if you have spent most of your working life at a desk? Liam's in Hemel Hempstead. Liam, what would you like to say?
Well, without further data, as you've already said,
yes.
I don't really agree with this as a policy.
No.
I spent many years working as an office worker, doing a long commute on the train at great expense for 20, 25 years, and was signed off multiple times with high blood pressure, from the stress of the job. And that was when I was younger. Seeing colleagues drop dead at their desk, I've actually seen that. A heart attack at 32. Seen people in their 50s having to retire. What
sort of work were you doing? Do you mind me asking? Banking. Okay, fair enough. Very high stress.
In the city. And it was high stress, and for the role I was in, actually quite low pay.
Right.
But now, at 54, I'm self-employed, but I drive an hour every day in each direction. I do an 11-hour day minimum, and then I've got an hour at the start of the day, an hour at the end of the day, and I go home, and just like you as a 16-year-old, I eat a big meal and fall asleep, and get up again at 6 o'clock. Sometimes it's shift work. Sometimes it's getting up and going to work at midnight. I don't think that manual labour has any. I mean, the challenges are different, but we all experience challenges in our work life.
I think the stress argument is a strong one, isn't it?
Yeah, and you mentioned scaffolders. Very fit, very hard-working people. Do you know? When was the last time you had some scaffolding put up? Do you know how much that costs? These people are very, very well paid.
I promised to give them a shout out, actually, the lads who put my scaffolding out. They came all the way from Essex, and then I think I did at the time. I hope I did. Hang on, don't interrupt me when I'm interrupting you. I forgot to give Steve a shout out as well. Steve started showering me with compliments on Wednesday morning when I was putting the bins out. It was such a perfect start to the day. So, Steve, thank you for that. It was. I apologise. It's taken me 2 days to remember to say hello. So we equate manual labour with low income, which is probably an outdated view, and we equate office work with somehow an easy life, which is probably unfair for a lot of people working in offices.
Yeah.
But the health impacts are clear. I mean, that is what they've looked at. You are going to have a shorter retirement if you've done physical labour all your life than you are if you've worked in an office, generally speaking.
Yeah, I'd like to see more data on that.
Yeah, fair enough.
No. I don't think that's 100% true.
No, maybe. And the world is changing as well, isn't it? And it may be all manner of other health impacts as well. 8 pints of lager every night, you're probably more likely to have a shorter retirement than if you don't drink 8 pints of lager every night. Mark's in Peckham. Mark, what do you reckon?
No, I think it's right to be able to retire early if you're in manual labour, building trades, things like that. I'm a electrician.
Yeah.
I've been, they're not the hard. I'm not saying we're not hard workers. We are a hard working trade, but we're down on our knees. We're up on ladders. We're out in the cold. We're down in trenches. I'm nearly 50. Been doing it since I was 16. My knees are shot. My hands are shot. I've had an operation on my shoulder due to work.
Yeah.
And a lot of the problems as well is a lot of the guys are self-employed. They won't be paying into private pensions, so they wouldn't have had the opportunity to retire early.
What age have you got in mind?
I had 45 in mind.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, but I've got another 10 years in front of me.
What noise did it make when it whooshed by? So you reckon another? Because 45 was a bit ambitious, wasn't it? It was a bit optimistic.
Well, that's when I was 21.
Oh, I see what you mean. So what are you thinking now? What are you thinking now?
It's going to be, I don't think I'm ever going to see a time when I'm going to fully retire, but just changing in what I do. So
just scale it down a bit, keep it ticking over.
Yeah, so step back from actually the physical side of it and then taking over more of the office work, which is easier, and I'm not. Yeah.
I think I agree with you. The last caller made some good points. You know, if you're tearing your hair out at your desk every day, or a boss can have an appalling impact on your mental health. If you've got a really nasty boss in an office, there'll be plenty of people who have a terrible time at work. But we're talking about generalisations, and if you're on your knees all day, or up a ladder, or lugging scaffolding around, or gardening, or something like that, you're going to take a toll that means you get to hang your hat up a bit earlier.
Well, my partner was 50 when she left London, and because she was exhausted, she was in a similar sort of industry to the last caller.
Yeah.
So I do see that, but at the same time, it does. A lot of people, like if he was in the banking industry, probably would have had a really good pension. Like I know
that's a good point as well. That's a good point as well.
End of term salaries, 60, 70 grand a year. So.
Would it affect your vote in an election?
I don't know if that would, because I know that I am, I'm sort of preparing for myself that, in 5-10 years' time, I'm not going to be on the tools so much. So, it's not going to be so difficult for me. But if I was in a position where I knew that I was not going to be in that position, then, that might change my vote.
Yeah, I can see why. Thank you, Mark. A text here, it's unsigned. It says, that banker suggesting that scaffolders are well paid is frankly ridiculous. Listen, a banker can be someone who works behind the counter in the Halifax. It's a very silly phrase to use, because you automatically think of investment bankers or someone sitting in front of a bunch of screens with a big trade on, and we're watching their bank balance go up or down exponentially. So it isn't necessarily very well paid, and scaffolding isn't necessarily very well paid either. I don't think he was being quite as offensive as you suggest, just by making that parallel. And it is expensive to have scaffolding put up anywhere. Patrick's in Penzance. Patrick, what do you think about this?
Well, how many scaffolders do you see over the age of 50 for a start?
Not
There's
very many.
For that.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
I've done both over the years. I used to be a white-collar worker, and there are a number of white-collar injuries I got as a young man. I slipped 2 discs from a sedentary occupation, RSIs.
Yes.
I'm now an electrician.
Okay.
And I think for me, an electrician's been quite good because it's quite yogic. But anecdotally, working on building sites, we're all falling apart in our 50s. I can't see how many of my colleagues are even going to make it to the retirement, to be honest. I mean, we are sponsored by ibuprofen. We share it at lunchtime.
The inflammation, just to take away the pain. Sponsored, but brought to you every day by ibuprofen.
Brought to you every day by ibuprofen. And also the amount of sheepish blokes of a certain age scuttling off to Pilates classes in the evening.
Just to keep
give
supple.
Each other a nudge, a nod and a wink as we enter what was predominantly
Tap on the nose. Tap on the nose. I'll have
pelvic floor.
Core strength. It's all about core strength, Patrick. You've got to watch your core strength down at the old...
But how do we calibrate this, James? How do we calibrate who's going to fall apart sooner?
Yeah.
I don't know where this comes from. Is there any chance that they're trying to pit us blue collars against the white collars, like they do?
No, I think it is. It's in good faith. It's Baroness Neville Rolfe who's been asked to look at the. There's the problem looming of essentially pensioners bankrupting the whole economy because of demographics and life expectancy and the rest of it. And she has recommended that, and I'll quote it, those who have performed physically demanding roles over many years should be allowed to access their pension early due to a higher likelihood of developing health problems. So it's a broad generalisation, but it is a fair one. And it's not undermined by the existence of an office worker with health problems or indeed of a scaffolder with the body of a 19-year-old.
It's interesting stuff. I have so many concerns for some of my colleagues. I mean, they do look like Igor out of the old Frankenstein films, where they're dragging a leg behind them, with a bucket of cement.
How much of it? Because I've always thought because I was so knackered, I did it flipping 30 odd years ago, but I was so knackered that I always thought if I did that every day, I'd be really fit.
I think to a certain point, I think into your 20s and 30s, I think that's probably the case. But I mean, I think, our bodies wore out. 100 years ago, we were all dead by the time we were 40 anyway.
Yeah,
and now,
unless you were rich.
I'm doing a physical job. And I'm not, I don't think it's that different from white-collar point of view. Sedentary jobs can be just as impactful on the body.
I don't agree with that. I mean, your slip discs notwithstanding, pushing a pushing a keyboard around all day or pushing a wheelbarrow around all day are going to have very different impacts. And the wheelbarrow impacts are likely to be life-shortening, whereas no one's ever died of repetitive strain injury, have they?
Well, that's a good point. And like I say, what you do see a lot more older people working to retirement age in white collar. In blue collar, if you start looking around on building sites, you start looking at anyone over the age of 50, 55, and there aren't that many of them, and B, they're not in good nick.
No, an endangered species. And that this legislation, if it were to come to pass, would reflect that, I think. I understand exactly where you're coming from. It feels like quite a blunt instrument. But it doesn't necessarily mean it would be the wrong thing to do. 11:30 is the time. Thank you, Patrick. I'm going to pay more attention now next time I walk past a building site looking for the signs of wear and tear. But how many people and I don't have a physically taxing job. My left knee's giving me all sorts of jip at the moment. Goodness knows what I'd be like if I was up and down a ladder all day. It's tough enough getting into the loft. 11:30 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It is 11:34 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the conversation has moved on from this ludicrous trade deal that Rishi Sunak claims is a benefit of Brexit, but Kemi Badenoch wants us to stop mentioning Brexit when we're talking about it. Almost as if the left arm doesn't know what the right arm's doing. And we're talking instead about retirement and a suggestion from Baroness Neville Rolfe, a minister, a government minister, that people who have performed physically demanding roles over many years should be allowed to access their pension early. Quite a few of you asking me to point out to younger listeners that you can't really rely on the pension in your dotage. You should make other arrangements if you can. And you're absolutely right to make that point. But this would allow you to access. I presume it's just the state element of your pension pot you can access early, because the private pensions work very differently. Joanna is in Cardiff. Joanna, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hi. So I just sort of want to preface what I'm about to say, by saying that I support people who work in physical labour getting their pensions early. I don't take away from that at all.
Sure.
And I just wanted to put a slightly different perspective out there, and that is around the impact of mental health problems on people who work in offices, perhaps. So I can, only speak about myself, and I'm 40 and I've suffered from anxiety and depression most of my life. And
I'm sorry.
I'm neurodiverse as well. And I used to do a very senior, well-paid position, which I had to leave under very unpleasant circumstances, in no small part due to mental health problems I was having. And I suppose I've left that, and I've got a new life now, and I'm doing a job that's much less demanding, and I enjoy it.
Yes.
However, it is still hugely demanding, and when I look to the future, I think, how am I going to be able to work until pension age because of the toll it takes on me?
Yes.
Just in terms of just the mental exhaustion and the physical impact that then has. I know if you've never suffered from anxiety before, it's hard to understand the physical impact.
It's exhausting as well, isn't it? I mean, it's absolutely exhausting.
Yeah, so I suppose that's all I wanted to say, really. It's not to take away from the physical labour.
No, it's a very powerful point, and don't worry, no one's going to think that you haven't been clear on that. But I guess the problem is bespoke, isn't it? You can't have bespoke retirement ages. So it's going to be, however it is implemented, it's going to be broad and quite blunt, and it would overlook people like you who have a very strong case for arguing that you should also be permitted to access your state pension a little bit earlier than others. But then how would, people would lie, sadly, as well, wouldn't they?
I know, and I don't have the answer. I wish I
But you
did,
just want to feel
I just
seen.
Wanted to put across. Yeah.
Yes, good.
I just wanted to put across that point.
Yes, no, I mean, it's a really important point. I don't know what the answer, like you, I don't know how you could possibly avoid it, but it would add to a sense of unfairness among large parts of the workforce, I suspect. And also, I mean, what if you just hate your job? as well. It's a kind of idea that why does he get to give up early when I have to carry on? Thank you, Joanna. You put your point perfectly. 11:38 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The sort of notion of comparing two jobs is quite tricky, but there is a sense of consensus on the hard, proper physical labour taking a toll on you physically, that now we would expect to live longer than we would have done 50 years ago. The idea of working right up until retirement age, it does feel a little bit unfair. Mike is in Tottenham. Mike, what would you like to say?
Sure.
Hello, Mike.
Hello, James. I'm sorry, did I interrupt there?
No, I can't. I've introduced you. I think you were talking to someone else. I think I interrupted you.
Well, I think it's a bit of both, but anyway. Yeah, I was about to say that I've worked 40-odd years in technical theatre.
Oh, yeah.
Up and down the country, all over the West End, around the world, in fact, on cruise ships and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But it's been a good job and a good life, and it's a hard job. It's a very, very hard job, which I don't think a lot of people appreciate. When you tell people, I work backstage and stuff, they go, I used to do the plays at school.
Yeah, so you're up and down ladders all the time. You're putting up lights, lugging heavy stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate that that's hard work.
Yeah, and I mean, particularly when you get away from the West End, and there's a lot of theatres in the country, but that's happening every weekend.
So how would they threshold it, as it were? What would you need to fill in to prove to them that you actually have spent 40 years doing hard physical work?
What the difficult thing is, and like somebody mentioned earlier about actually telling people, yes, get some sort of private pension or superannuation, or get that done first, kids. But I'm at the point now where I'm 60 in a couple of months, and I can't walk properly anymore. I can't climb those ladders. I can't shimmy up a 100-foot vertical ladder in about 10 seconds like I used to. And I can't do what I've been doing for the last 40 years anymore. And I'm on benefits. I'm on about 50 quid a week.
Right.
And some things are okay. I'm now in council and accommodation. But I think the problem is that
what's the problem? There's a logic to the idea that you should retire earlier than someone who's working in an office, isn't there?
I think there is, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like I thought, well, I haven't got the pension plan, but I'm happy to work till 67, as it will be, because I love what I'm doing so much. But now I can't do that anymore.
The choice has been taken away from you.
And the sense is the only thing I've kind of got to look forward to is finding some sort of probably office job that I can do one armed, because the arthritis in my left shoulder takes my left arm out. That's the difficult thing, and it's not like I haven't. I'm not saying that doing that harder physical work makes me a better person, and because I have to do
it just makes you more damaged, as it were. But it just means, if you were an inanimate object, if you were being lugged around all day, you'd have more dents on you than if you'd been sitting in a chair all day. It goes without saying. And Miles makes a further point as well to Mike. He says one big difference is you can always get a different office job, whereas manual workers often don't have other choices, as we didn't get the qualifications earlier in life. Philip is in Pontefract. Philip, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Philip.
I've been a road worker for the last 31 years.
Yeah.
Luckily for me, I'm retiring next year, 55. I've got a decent company pension.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, and I'm pleased I have, because I'm like to think I'm going to do another 12 years in this business.
Physically chattering, I imagine.
Yeah. I wanted to finish early.
Yes.
For health. I want to finish that I can think, I can do healthy things now, instead of thinking when I'm 66, 67, thinking, I wish I'd have just retired early because I can't do this now.
Yeah, I'm a couple of years younger than you. I was thinking that the other day. I was just thinking that you think of retiring when you're in your 40s. You think you're going to be physically the same in your 70s as you were, and you've got to actually take into account that you're going to be a bit slower and you're going to be a bit more fragile. So your retirement's going to be different from what you imagined when you were a younger man.
Yeah. Luckily for me, I've got a decent pension. People haven't got that, and we have to keep working. Like I say, I want to think I'm going to do it in this business. I do like the tarmac side of road building.
Yeah, that is proper graft, isn't it?
one of the factors as well that people maybe not understanding is the weather conditions that we work in.
Yes.
My job now is probably 80% of the year is on nights, which is very, very unsociable.
Yeah, shift work can take it out of you anyway, regardless of whether it's physical or not. But then again, you've opened up another loophole, though. So shift workers in an office are going to be suffering more than office workers who don't do shifts. Night shifts are absolutely shattering.
I've got sympathy with people working offices because it's a different sort of stress levels and things like that. But a lot of people in my business were academic at school, as Fred Dimder once said. There's jobs for everybody.
Love Fred Dimder.
I've made a career of this.
Yeah.
But there is a limitation. I've worked for the last 8 nights and I've got wet every night.
Oof. Are there many?
Wet every night.
Have you got many colleagues in their late 50s? I mean, do people stick it out much?
There's a few touching 60,
right,
that aren't really healthy at the moment.
No, I was going to say they must be really feeling the strain. Oh, well, good luck to you. You must have been quite a forward-thinking young man, Philip. You must have had your eye on the horizon as a younger man to set up that pension in that way.
Well, that's it. You've got to sort of like look at that, and to try and tell my kids now, sort of get into a pension as young as you can, early as you can, and think about your future when you're younger. And don't just like think, oh, let's just go out for a pint all the time. Start thinking about the future because it's here before you know it.
Yeah, listen to us. We should be sitting on a bench, shouldn't we? Two old codgers. It is here before you know it. It's coming up to 11:45. Thank you, Philip. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What would work as manual labour? I work as a tennis coach, which I wouldn't describe as particularly difficult, but I do over 45 hours a week on a tennis court, and that can be very physically demanding. So do I get to retire early? Again, it's a fair point. I don't think that Baroness Neville Rolfe had tennis coaches in mind when she suggested that people who do hard physical labour should get to draw down their state pension a little earlier than those of us who don't.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, with James O'Brien.
It is 11:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I think there's a broad support for the idea of people who've spent their lives working in hard physical labour getting to retire earlier than people who haven't, albeit with various loopholes and a need for further data. There'd be a threshold on it as well, wouldn't there? I suppose if you change career at 55, would it change your mind as well when you were a kid? Would you think, I might go into that instead of that because I get to retire early? So it seems unlikely, but there are, as I say, several little loopholes, but not enough to undermine the broad sense of consensus. I quite like a broad sense of consensus. Brad picks up on a point that I made at the top of the hour. Is this the same government? Is this proposal from the same government that increased the retirement age of firefighters? Yes, I mean, technically it's the same party, it's not the same government. John's in Wakefield, staying in West Yorkshire. John, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Jim.
First-time caller to you.
Welcome.
A bit in awe and a wee bit nervous.
It's only me.
And
It's
thank
only
you for all
me.
the work you do. You're a bit of fresh air to the radio.
Thank you. What a lovely thing to say.
I've worked on both sides. I did 25 years in the building trade from 16, and then I got off my knees and onto my backside, and I sat in a chair, and I was a therapist for about 25 years.
Right.
So I think I can look at it from the both perspectives in a way.
Yes.
And so obviously the physical side, the knees were shot, and I seen people in my 20s when they were 50, 55 pull themselves into real spaces, and I thought these guys are prone for heart attacks. So I got myself retrained and did counselling and therapy. So the thing for me is there are pros and cons with both sides, and it's all about resilience. The physical resilience you need to be in the building trade or to do manual work, but also you need mental resilience. And I feel my mental resilience is I was made retired early. Is shot as well. So so while I have a lot of sympathy for my ex-professions in the building trade, I also want to recognise, like one of your lady callers as well, that
so you're dealing
the mental capacity.
Yeah, that you're dealing with quite traumatic scenarios as well in some, presumably. So I mean, a lot of therapists do, and you carry a very different sort of mental burden than than other jobs that would still be sedentary. So, I mean, that is the the fundamental problem here, is the broadness of the generalisations, isn't it, at the moment?
It is. I think I can understand from a physical point of view, and the guy who said that, we didn't live past 40. So for a 55-year-old, a 60-year-old, the body doesn't function as well. But also the mental capacity for people who work not in manual labour, as it were, in office jobs or sitting down. We have to recognise that and balance it. So we have to put it in some sort of scales, James, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, the challenge is going to be coming up with the scales that you describe. I wouldn't fancy doing that myself. Almost every text that comes in throws another little spanner in the works, so I may have to withdraw slightly from the broad consensus theory. There'll be lots of jobs where you just burn out mentally as opposed to physically. You know, where you just can't. I keep waiting for it to happen here. I think I'm going to come on one day, the light's going to come on, nothing's going to come out. It's just going to have sort of fallen apart. Some of you may think it already has. I hope not. But do you see what I mean? I couldn't do this at 90. But depending on how you age, you might not be able to do it at 60 or 65. Steph is in Brighton. Steph, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello,
First
Steph.
time I'm talking to you. Nice to speak to you.
Likewise, thank you.
So we're talking about blue collar, white collar, and
Yes.
I don't particularly like the phrase, but I was thinking more about pink collar jobs.
Yes.
And I was thinking that
What's a pink collar job?
it's basically, that's why I said I don't want to say. It's jobs that typically women would do.
Okay.
And I was thinking about how, some of those, what's going to happen? Are they manual labour? Like, my mum's a hairdresser.
Yeah.
She's on her feet all day.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever smelt, like, perm solution. It's toxic. She has to breathe that.
Yes.
So I don't know, is that manual labour? Like, where does she fall? And then I was thinking about nurses. The Telegraph was saying if you've been to university, you don't qualify. They go to university. I personally think that's manual labour, what they're doing.
Yes. I missed that. I forgot to reference that, actually. That is part of the story as well, isn't it? The university angle. The presumption that if you got a degree, then you'd be doing a white-collar job. I don't think they'd be able to use that as the criterion.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, that was just what I saw as an article there. But my big point was, well, what happens to these female, more roles that are most likely to be taken up by women?
Well, you tell me, how would you do it? If I'm going to put you in charge, I'm making you Minister for Pink Collars. And I want to know what thresholds we're going to have in place that would qualify people like your mum for an early retirement or an early pension.
Well, I personally think it should be the same across the board. I'm not necessarily sure that we should have. I think people will want to work longer.
But
if
you've
they
heard
can.
from all these old geezers whose bones are falling to pieces. I mean, literally. I mean, I love that phrase: hauling yourself into a loft, hauling yourself through a roof space, and you've got arthritis in one arm, and you've had a knee replacement. I mean, I think there's more of a case than you allow, surely, for people just reaching a state of physical decrepitude.
Of course, I agree with that. But I think there are some jobs which people will want to do later on in life, and that's also okay. I think it's good to give people the choice of, hey, do you want to stop now, or do you want to continue? Just the other day, I was speaking to a family friend, an older gentleman, and he was talking about how disappointed he is that he's retired because he was doing an office job, he loved it, and it was part of his social sort of standing in society, and he was very keen to get back to work. So I think we should just let people what they want to do a bit more.
Up to a point, but then I mean, the thing we keep missing, and it's my fault for not reiterating it again and again, is that this is designed to stave off essential bankruptcy for the country when there aren't enough people in the workforce to sustain the income of the people who've retired. So another bit, it's on the Telegraph's business pages, this story, and it goes into a lot more detail than the Daily Mail coverage that I was relying on. And it says it could mean younger people now would be getting pretty close to 70 before they could retire. So there's no earthly way that could apply to manual labour.
No, I see that. I definitely see what you're saying here. My concern is that we might get into a position where women are typically working longer than men because they have roles that mean that they don't do as much manual labour, but we do manual labour, in my opinion. Like, I'm 5'2", I weigh 6 stone. Like, me picking up a box is different from you picking up a box.
Yes, I know, it's a very good point. And this is what we've said, isn't it? The broadness of the generalisations is is the potential fatal flaw in the whole proposal. Steph, thank you. The pink collar will stay with me. It's an excellent point, actually, and not the kind of jobs that Baroness Neville-Rolfe had in mind, as far as I can tell. Some people criticising the proposals as being too draconian. It's interesting how newspapers pick on different bits, because the headline on the same story about the same report it has raised state pension age to 69 to stop overspending. But, of course, they've just had to park plans to raise the state pension age more quickly because of decreased life expectancy. Phil's in Sidcup, probably the last word on this. Phil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Massively angry.
Are you?
I'm an office worker. Yeah, yeah. You wouldn't believe how angry I'm about.
Calm down, Philip.
But the reason is I'm going to be a bit sorry for this. I'm going to try. It's going off on a tangent. The whole thing is pitched about the fact that the government can't afford this. That's just mystical, that is. A guy, Alan Greenspan, was head of the Fed, the US Fed, and he was asked by Paul Ryan, Republican, about why people should take out private pensions. And Alan Greenspan said there's nothing stopping the US government creating as much money as it wants and giving it to someone. It's not about the money, it's about the productive resources to absorb that. Right. And what I'm saying is that we've got to be concerned not how the government creates money and gives it to everyone, which it can do, and it's got loads of accounts, and if I've studied the Bank of England's balance sheet, so I know it can create money at will.
Mate,
do we
just
have
take
the productive capacity? Sorry.
We're talking about the people with office jobs retiring later than people with...
But what I'm trying to say is...
No, but I don't want you to.
I don't... Incorrect.
No, well, it's not, is it? Because I appreciate what you're saying. You're calling for a complete overhaul of the financial system.
No, I'm not. I'm saying the argument is, have we got enough productive capacity to provide all the resources for all those pensioners that will be there? But it's
they're looking to cap spending on pensions at 6% of gross domestic product. So there's always going to be a percentage, however much productivity there is.
Policy, James. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, all right, I hear you, but you came in with a minute to go, and you're suggesting that we should have done the entire topic differently.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying it's pitched differently. It's pitching two sets of people against each other. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, okay. No, I hear that. So what would you do instead in a sentence?
I don't know. I haven't got enough time,
it's not as easy as it looks, is it?
God.
Phil, mind how you go. It's coming up to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We've tried to do cultural stuff for the last couple of weeks on Fridays at 12. I haven't got anything this week. But there's a couple of parenting stories that I think are quite interesting. The usual suspects are very upset and troubled even by news that the proportion of unmarried women becoming pregnant is greater than the figure for married women. But it may be another story that I turn your attention to next, which is about the impact on you of having strict parents. Children with strict parents who shout a lot are much more likely to develop lasting mental health problems. I'm quite drawn to that story as someone who was lucky not to have particularly strict parents, but I've often wondered whether it ends up doing more harm than good.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
And we can do them both, can't we? I don't know why we don't have to choose between two stories. They're both parenting related. It sets up the challenge of my introduction being a little bit more difficult than usual, but here we go. 3 minutes after 12 is the time. Single women set a troubling new pregnancy record, says the Daily Mail, while the Times reports today that hostile parents scare children into anxiety and aggression. I, as you know, am fascinated by social change, and usually, until quite recently, it's always felt like progress. Of course, there are reversals underway, most obviously over in America on Roe versus Wade, on abortion legislation. But the old mode, the old model of the nuclear family, the 2.4 children, the breadwinner going out to work and the homemaker staying at home, that's obviously broken. The notion that having a child in a marriage or a civil partnership is the preferred lifestyle choice has also diminished, I think, in recent years. but the proportion of unmarried women becoming pregnant is now greater than the figure for married women for the first time ever. So for every 1,000... See, the problem here, I guess, is also the use of the word single. The 75.1 conceptions for every 1,000 single women in 2021 compared with 72.2 for every 1,000 married women. So it's women in a marriage or a civil partnership now have a lower conception rate than women who are not in any formalised relationship. And I want to know whether it matters, because most of these women won't be single. I don't know why the Daily Mail has to put the word single in a headline. They just will be women who are not married or in civil partnerships. If you're quite new to the programme, I used to be quite silly on this subject. I'm not... If you're not new to the programme, I'm not going to bore you again with an account of how my mind changed and how silly I used to be. But if I tell you that I used to be on more or less the same page as Ian Duncan Smith when it came to being rude about unmarried couples and children born out of wedlock and the importance of marriage in a relationship, then you'll get an idea of how daft I used to be. And I worked out why. And it's a really simple explanation that goes back to me being adopted and therefore having an image in my own mind of marriage being better than unmarried mums. That simple. It was just psychological conditioning that was entirely sort of self-inflicted by my experiences. Nothing bad about it, no negatives, except that I ended up being a bit of an arse about unmarried people. So I want to know whether you think it matters. And I want to try and do it a bit differently from usual, if I can. I want you to call me if your parents weren't married. And I want you to tell me whether you care. I guess it's going to be quite boring if everyone rings me to say, no, I don't care at all. I just want to know what that's like. I just want to know whether or not, and everyone of different ages, because if you're in your 60s or your 70s and your parents weren't married, you carried stigma, I think, genuine stigma. But if you're in your 20s, it seems to me quite unlikely that you would have felt that different at school. That no one at my school had unmarried parents. Partly, I suppose, because I went to Catholic school, but largely because of my age. Even divorce was quite rare back in the day. So that's the first question I've got is let's not look at it from the Daily Mail's point of view or some think tank that says it's troubling to see that more women are choosing to have children without being in a stable relationship. And by stable relationship, they mean marriage or civil partnership. I just want to know what it's like from the child's point of view. And it's not going to be the same answer, as I mentioned. It's going to be quite specific to generation. But I want to know. So call me now if your parents were not married or are not married and tell me whether or not you think it is troubling. Because that's the bit about the language here that I don't like. It's accusatory. Christina Adoni of the Centre for Social Justice said it was troubling to see that more women are choosing to have children without being in a stable relationship. It's only the children of unmarried parents can really answer the question of whether or not it is a negative, whether it is undesirable. Because if it's over half, if you've got a majority of people unmarried, it would, and society hasn't exactly come shuddering to a grinding halt, has it? The sun still comes up in the morning. I wonder whether the people who think it's troubling need to give their head a wobble. So hit the numbers now on that one, and you will get through. 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. You see, here's a great example of what I'm trying to say. I was married when I had my first daughter, James. My husband walked out on us when she was 1 year old. And hasn't supported her or seen her since. He doesn't care. I had my second daughter with a man I'm not married to, but I'm still with him, and he raises my first daughter as his own. So where do I fit into this scale? I don't think it matters. Marriage doesn't mean forever. I think that's a very good point, and that's why I don't like the language of the headline, the idea that it's troubling. But I want to hear from children of unmarried parents of whatever age, on whether or not you think that your start in life was worse than the start of a child with married parents, okay? That's the best way to put it. You are being told that your start in life was worse, was less desirable. I want to know how you feel about that. 0345 60 60 973. And, of course, you are allowed to agree with it as well, not just disagree. And then the other element of this conversation, completely different story, but I couldn't choose between them, so I'm going to try to do both. This is about children with strict parents being much more likely to develop lasting mental health problems. So hostile parenting styles were found to increase the risk of 3-year-olds growing up to become anxious, hyperactive or aggressive by about 50%. And the measures that they used, they followed children. It's Irish research. The second bit of research we've covered this week from an Irish university. They were followed from the age of 3 to 9, and the style was classified as hostile if it involved frequent harsh discipline. So that would involve shouting at children regularly, routine physical punishment, which is, rarer these days, but it doesn't have to be slapping, does it, or smacking. There could be other things. Isolating children when they misbehave, so, being sent to your room, or damaging their self-esteem, or punishing them unpredictably depending on the parent's mood. And every child went through the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, which is a standardised mental health assessment, at the ages of 3, 5 and 9, and the children who had been exposed to what they call hostile parenting were 50% more likely to display anxiety, hyperactivity and other mental health. 50% more likely to fall into the group for poor mental health if you had hostile parents. I think that's fascinating. And I just want to know if that's ringing any bells with you. The number, of course, remains the same, 0345 6060 973. And I want you to try to put it into words. I want you to try and explain why you feel that the strictness of your parents has caused you problems in life. Well, but my mum and dad were great at this. Really consistent. I imagine the worst imaginable thing would be to get punished one day and ignored the next for exactly the same behaviour. Inconsistency in parenting must be awful. So what's it like to have unmarried parents? There you go. What's it like to have unmarried parents? 0345 6060 973. And what was it like to have really strict parents? And maybe you think it didn't do you any harm and it actually did you a load of good. There's two really simple questions. God knows why it's taken me 12 minutes to get to the end of the discovery process. What is it like to have unmarried parents? Do you feel that you are somehow inferior? Because that's what the Daily Mail is telling you today and various other right-wing think tankers. There is very little to celebrate in this data that shows couples moving away from marriage before having children. It will mean more children in years to come will witness their parents separating and the misery that comes with it. We shouldn't be indifferent to this. Right, what do you think? And what's it like to have really strict parents? Let's start with Shannon, who's in Morpeth. Shannon, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi there.
Hello.
So, nice to speak to you. So,
we'll see.
Basically, no, I suppose for me it doesn't really matter. So, my parents had me in '93.
Right.
They weren't married, and they actually got married when I was about 4 or 5, but then subsequently got divorced when I was 10.
Okay.
So, which was really quite traumatic actually. But so I really don't think it matters in this day and age whether you have children before or after marriage. And I think as well, there's so much financial pressure at the moment.
On a wedding.
Married. Yeah, on a wedding.
Yes,
yeah,
that's true.
Me and my husband got married 3 years ago, and we've got no children. But even though we kept the wedding very small, it was just so expensive. And obviously, you don't have to do that. But then with, when you look at the cost of living and things like that, I guess people are weighing up their priorities and,
So I'm just trying to work out, when you said when you were born, I was trying to work out how old you are, but I'm too tired. It's Friday.
I'm coming up 30.
Right. So and for your generation, so you're 20 years younger than me. For your generation, it doesn't carry anything like the weight that it used to do, does it?
No,
But you got married, though.
Yes, I got married, and
why did you get married, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I've been with my husband now for 11 years, and to be honest, we've both seen our parents divorce, and how awful it was for both of us, both at very different ages, actually.
Yes.
When our parents got divorced, but and that just made us. It sounds so backwards, but it made us want to get married and not to turn out like that.
Okay.
And if and when we do have children, and that's a whole another conversation about, women having children later on in life now or choosing not to have children at all. But I would like to think, no matter what comes our way, we don't get divorced the way our parents did.
But that in a way, you've talked yourself round now. Because the marriage is we both believe that marriage is a stronger glue than being unmarried, and therefore we would probably want people to be married before having children because the glue is stronger. You see what you've done?
Yes, no, and I don't think necessarily it matters, but I do prefer the idea. But I'm certainly not. I'm certainly not against it because you see, people get married and it's toxic relationships, and then the children are growing up in those in those relationships, and sometimes children are happier.
It's true. There's never going to be an objective algorithm. If the parents are biting chunks out of each other every day, then it's good for everybody when they go their separate ways. So there's no objective algorithm. But it is interesting. We both subscribe to that notion of the stronger glue, which is in and of itself part of the process that leads to this slightly offensive headline. Single women set a troubling new record for pregnancies. What's troubling about it? And then we answered it together as well. We both got a bit of cognitive dissonance that it's troubling because you are less likely to stay together if you haven't got married. That's not an opinion. That's just counting. 12:15 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 19 minutes after 12. 2 stories, 2 questions. Story number 1: single women set a troubling new pregnancy record. As the child of an unmarried mum, do you feel that your existence or the proliferation of people like you is indeed, quotes, troubling, end quotes? And hostile parents scare children into anxiety and aggression. What was it like growing up with very strict parents who shouted a lot? Anthony's in Barnet. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
First time caller.
Welcome.
Right, so 2 points to make. I was raised by a single mum, and my childhood was fantastic.
Yeah,
it was amazing.
Oh, how lovely!
There wasn't a single point in it that I felt that something was missing.
Gosh.
That there was a problem, and I think that this headline it's offensive to every single mother out there who, life's not a fairy tale for everybody. And all these women who break their back to do the best job they can, to put a headline out like that is just...
You dig into it. It is. I can see why you're using those words, and I'm certainly not going to argue with you. It is
disgusting. I mean, how dare whoever write that? I mean, I don't know what their life was like, but how dare you bracket, all of these single mums across this country who do both jobs.
Yes.
They break their back. And you want to label them like that? It's just ridiculous.
There's an enormous arrogance involved, and I speak as a recovering addict.
It's pompous.
Again, I speak as a recovering addict. Because on this particular subject, I used to be unbearably pompous and arrogant because I would have sat here sitting in judgment on your mum's choices, which I've got no real right to do, have I?
It's ridiculous. Now, my mum passed away a few years ago.
I'm sorry.
It is sad, but we were friends from childhood. My teenager, she let me get away with murder, I think. But we were friends. And I'm married now myself, but that's not in some sort of show against my childhood.
No.
I just happened to fall in love with a woman and marry her.
Yes. Yes, of course.
But my father and her, it didn't work out. But life is not a fairy tale. Life is not a movie. And to all the single mothers who are doing their thing, we should support them.
Beautifully put.
And
you had loving stability at home, which is the most important thing any child can have, isn't it?
It was fantastic, and I just, whoever wrote that should sort of hang their head in shame.
I'll tell you what happens, shall I? This is pretty straightforward. So the statistic comes out. The Office for National Statistics is there's a clue in the title. It's dishing out statistics all the time. Yeah. And the news emerges for the first time since records began. Women outside of marriage or civil partnership had a higher conception rate than those within marriage or civil partnership. And the Daily Mail journalist then gets his contacts book out and needs to put an angle on it. And the angle needs to be, because it's the Daily Mail, it needs to be disapproval. They need to paint a target. They don't have to report it like that. I haven't actually looked for it in other newspapers. I'll have a look in The Guardian in a minute and see whether or not they've picked up.
Many other family dynamics are changing as time goes on.
Exactly.
And what was
but you ring up, you
years
get
ago may not be the norm now.
You would once have rung a bishop or someone like, I don't know, Mary Whitehouse, but now you ring one of these weird think tanks and get them to sit in judgment on it, and that's how you get your story, and that's how the word troubling appears in the headline in quotes. It's like night follows day. Here's a statistic. Let's find someone to warn us that this is the end of civilization as we know it. Bish bosh. Daily Mail. Job done.
What an utter nonsense.
Beautifully put.
And utter nonsense. Everyone's life is its own thing, and it's individual. And there can be a married couple who are doing a terrible job, and there can be a single mother who's doing a fantastic job. And it is just due to circumstance.
Yeah,
so,
and there may be some broad generalisations on. I mean, certainly on relationships staying together more likely to happen if you're married. But you don't have to attach to that the negative interpretation of people who've gone down different paths. I mean, it is astonishing how baked into tabloid journalism it is in this country. You cannot report a story without somehow finding a target for criticism and Rotten Tomatoes, but you've just unpicked it perfectly. Thank you, Anthony. Lisa is in Woking. Lisa, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Nice to speak to you.
Likewise.
So my parents were not married,
Right.
and then they got married when I was, I want to say about 18 months, maybe a bit older.
Yeah.
And it was weird to ever say that I was at my parents' wedding.
Yeah.
Something that I just wouldn't have spoken about at all at school. Because nobody else had that. It was weird enough when then they got divorced, and I was probably there was only one or two of us in the class that had divorced parents, and now it is so much more common. But it really wasn't. And the face, the look of people's faces is just like, oh.
For the divorce?
Yeah.
More than for the attending your parents' marriage?
I don't think I ever said I had been.
But were you conscious of it then? Did you feel judged?
Very.
Okay. I'm guessing you're about my age, are you?
No.
You're much younger than me. What?
No, I'm 34.
Oh, blimey.
Yeah.
I didn't think you'd have been carrying that. There's no need to laugh when I suggest that you might be the same age as me, Lisa. It's not an insult, You
no, that's true.
You might accrue all manner of life experience by the time you get to my stage of life. But I wouldn't have thought someone in their 30s experienced that kind of social stigma in the way that someone my age.
Yeah, it was. So I would have been in primary school in the 90s, and it really was. I just remember me and another girl, and that I think her dad had left, and we just used to be the most boisterous.
Yeah.
To kind of cover it, really, being like the loudest thing in the room to try and just, ignore any comments or you may, if you feel like it's the wrong thing.
No, I'm sorry to hear that, because it's just not fair, is it? But it adds to, and it's also a bit chicken and egg, because you shouldn't have felt like that. But you did, because of the way society is structured. So you create the problem by having the social attitudes in a way.
Yeah, and then it made me not want to get married and have children.
Did it really?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm with someone now, and I bring up his daughter.
Right.
So, and we are looking possibly to get married at some point.
Okay.
But the thought of it is just like not terrifying, but it just. Yeah, I get very awkward when people ask me about that as well.
It's little you, isn't it? It's little you really feeling the mark of your parents' relationship, mark of your parents' divorce.
Yeah.
That's really sweet of you to explain that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, I love these conversations because we find out what it is like to look at the world through completely different windows. I thank you, Lisa. 26 minutes after 12. I did know this would happen because I did it the wrong way round, so I'm not getting the calls from strict parents, because my switchboard's full of people ringing in about being the child of a single mum. So self-selecting. But remember, as I bid farewell to Lisa, it frees up a phone line for someone to tell me what it was like to grow up with very strict parents, and whether that you recognise this research from Ireland showing that it can have a very negative impact on your mental health, even by the age of 7, 8 or 9. Never mind later into adulthood. Ashley is in Glasgow. Ashley, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I grew up
with unmarried strict parents.
Fantastic! You've got wow! You've gone for the double. Superb. Sorry, I shouldn't make light of your experience.
It's fine. It's fine. So my parents were 19 and 20 when they had me. They were both in the military.
Right.
We now know that my dad had an alcohol problem.
Right.
So I was 6 weeks old when my parents split up.
Oof.
I had very strict parents, as I've mentioned. I bounced between houses my entire childhood. And then I met my now husband at 19. And by that point, I hadn't had any contact with my dad for years.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And my husband convinced me to kind of give it a go.
Yeah.
Kind of stay back, but give it a go.
Yeah.
And I did. And my mum and dad then got back in touch with each other. They're not together. They both have separate partners, and they are so happy.
Oh, that's nice.
But when I'm coming up on 30 now, and when I was pregnant with my youngest daughter, my dad was diagnosed with throat and tongue cancer.
Oh, boy.
And the first person my dad called was my mum.
Oh, that's amazing, isn't it?
Because I had preeclampsia, and they knew, and I was also getting married at that time, and they knew that news had to come in a specific way
so you had a
to help me.
Yeah.
And it was literally a case of I had my mum, my dad, my stepmum, my stepdad. We all sat down together. They explained exactly what was going on. They explained the appointments that were coming up. My mum works in the NHS, as do I, and she had actually got him a specific referral to somebody. When my dad was declared cancer-free, my mum was one of the first people
nice happy ending. How did the strictness impact you, do you think? How did...
So, my parents were in the military. I wasn't the same as, like, other kids. I couldn't go out late. I had to be back by a certain time. I had to have, like, my room always had to be spotless, which now leads to me being, like, a massive slob now. I have got a bit of a problem with authority.
Okay.
Because I had to deal with it my whole life.
Yeah.
I raised my children by thinking, what did my parents do? And then I do the opposite.
That's interesting. Were they shouty?
Yeah, they were both really shouty, but my dad was kind of degrading, so if he couldn't get something right...
That's on the list, actually.
He would degrade me, and whereas... So I grew up my entire life thinking everything that happened with my family was my fault.
Oh.
And then it wasn't until I got in, when I met my husband and he convinced me to go to therapy,
I was about to ask about that. Yes, exactly.
They were like, you're a baby. You're a baby brought into a 19-year-old's life and you have no control over... And that's it. Like, my dad still drinks.
Sure.
I have no control over whether or not my dad drinks.
That's the point.
I can't force him to stop drinking.
No.
But I can make sure my children never see him drunk.
You can. That's it, isn't it? It's the old, God grant me the grace to accept the things I cannot change, the strength to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And it's on the list, actually, Ashley, that notion of parents damaging your self-esteem as being very much one of the factors that can lead to poorer mental health later in life. Crikey. I'm sure you're not a slob, but my goodness, that idea of just making all your decisions based on doing the opposite is quite powerful. I said we weren't going to do any culture this hour after doing books and poetry for the Friday at 12 the last 2 weeks. Quite a lot of you are sending me that Larkin poem, This Be the Verse, which of course has some very famous thoughts on the relationship between parents and children, and you know the one. They bleep you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were bleeped up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like the coastal shelf. Get out as quickly as you can and don't have any kids yourself. It's not exactly a cheerful poem, is it? It's 12:31. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
This is LBC with James O'Brien. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
It's 25 to 1. And as you've heard, the net seems to be tightening for Donald Trump. It's interesting why, though, because it's not because of the grand jury in Georgia that is investigating a phone call he made to the Secretary of State there, seemingly imploring the official to facilitate election fraud. It's not because of the investigations at the Justice Department into the January the 6th riot, which of course disrupted the transfer of power and left 6 people dead, although he did get impeached for that. He also got impeached for withholding military aid to Ukraine so that he could try to dig up dirt on Joe Biden's son. It's not that's got him into bother. It's not the hundreds of classified documents that he took to Mar-a-Lago, his tacky resort in Florida. That's not what's got him essentially facing arrest next week. Simon Marks, LBC's US editor, is here to tell us what has done for him in the end.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, James, to identify the fact that what we are witnessing here is the thinnest possible prosecutorial gruel that is being directed in Donald Trump's direction. This is the case that revolves around the hush money payments, $130,000, that were made to the adult film actress Stormy Daniels in the dying days of America's presidential election campaign in 2016 to stop her from publishing her tell-all story in the National Enquirer tabloid magazine here. Stormy Daniels was poised on the eve of America's 2016 election to reveal the scale of her affair with Donald Trump, and prosecutors allege, or are going to allege in this criminal case, that Trump paid off the National Enquirer, paid off Stormy Daniels for the rights to her story to prevent the National Enquirer from publishing that story. Now, you know, hush money payments are not necessarily in and of themselves illegal, so prosecutors are going to have to prove that there were nefarious reasons for that payment to be made, namely that Donald Trump wanted to influence the outcome of the presidential election by ensuring that Stormy Daniels' claims never made their way into the eyes or to the ears of America's voters. But there's a second piece to this criminal case against him, which relates to the way in which the payment was recorded and registered with the Federal Election Commission. Because remember, it wasn't Donald Trump that signed the check. It was Michael Cohen, his former lawyer, who has already served a jail sentence for making the payments to Stormy Daniels and is now going to be the star witness in the trial of Donald Trump if it ever takes place. I say if it ever takes place because there are many legal analysts, and many of them are not supporters of Donald Trump, who think that this Manhattan prosecutor is taking a chance. He's rolling the dice. This is untested law, and there are many observers, including former Vice President Mike Pence, branding all of this an outrage last night, who indicated that he believes the case may collapse before it ever comes to trial. But certainly the stage is set for drama in New York, we think next Tuesday, when Donald Trump surrenders to the authorities, will head to the courthouse to be formally charged. He'll have to have his mugshot taken. Possibly he'll be fingerprinted unless his attorneys and the prosecutor can find a way of negotiating that away. And he, we are told, relishes the prospect of making a perp walk that he will use to portray himself as a political martyr as his campaign to win back the keys to the Oval Office continues.
It's never dull, is it? They'll need a very small fingerprint pad, won't they, for Donald Trump. So just briefly, if Michael Cohen was guilty of campaign finance violations, surely it's and the payments were made on his behalf, on Trump's behalf. What can Trump plead? I mean, if it does, I understand that it may not get to that point. But what will he claim? That Michael Cohen gave Trump's former lover $130,000 on Trump's behalf without Trump knowing?
Well, it certainly seems like an odd claim to make, but It's perfectly possible that that is what Trump's lawyers will advance in defense of their client. But they're much more likely initially to go after the untested area of this case, which is the way in which the payment was recorded and registered with the Federal Election Commission. Was that in and of itself an effort to mislead the public and influence the outcome of the election? They're going to push away at that because there is no legal precedent that necessarily means that the prosecutor can expect to secure conviction in this case. And that's one of many reasons, James, why observers have viewed this as a zombie case. It was the case that just wouldn't die. It just wouldn't go away, even though you've got prosecutors in all of those other jurisdictions. Georgia, where he made that phone call asking for another another 12,000 votes, the Department of Justice investigation into the mishandling of classified documents, the ongoing investigations into his orchestration of the riots on Capitol Hill 2 years ago. I mean, prosecutors and investigators in all of those cases must today be wondering whether the district attorney in New York has made an unfortunate move because it's allowed Republicans to rally around Trump, accuse the prosecutor in New York of political interference in the next presidential election because they say he's trying to remove Trump's chess piece off the board. And that will be exactly the same argument that is used when inevitably other much more serious criminal charges stack up against the former president.
Gosh, watch this space. And it'll be on Tuesday, will it?
Looks like it. Looks like it's going to be Tuesday in Manhattan.
And what? Just finally, Simon, what does that mean operationally? He won't be locked up or anything like that. He'll be taken, as you say, to the perp walk, photographed, interviewed, and then he'll go home.
Yeah, I mean, it's what, when I was a cub reporter, we used to refer to as a brief up and down. Yeah. I mean, he will be in the courthouse formally to be arraigned. I mean, he will have to surrender to authorities. It's a serious moment. Yes. We'll get to see the mugshot. He may well be fingerprinted. I mean, there's going to have to be accommodation made for his Secret Service retinue, who have to be with him at all times because he's the former president. But you know, he will, I think, at the end of the day, undoubtedly be allowed to go home. And also, by the way, definitely allowed to continue campaigning for the presidency in 2024. Donald Trump, even now, is the clear frontrunner in the race to win the Republican Party's presidential nomination. And that's why you're seeing his rivals not necessarily come out in defense of him over the hush money payment, but absolutely target this prosecutor and threaten him with investigations on Capitol Hill and the like.
Simon Marks, as always, providing chapter and verse on the latest twist in the Donald Trump tale. I would also recommend an excellent comment piece in The Guardian today, actually, under the headline, "Hush Money to a Porn Star. Of course this was how Trump was indicted," by Moira Donegan. It's beautifully written and very detail-heavy as well. You could say the same about Simon Marks. Beautifully spoken and very detail-heavy as well. So thank you for that. Okay, squeeze in at least one call before the break, and then I must bring you up to date with this week's Full Disclosure, which is a doozy. I mean, a truly fascinating one, which I'll tell you more about shortly. But first, James is in Cardiff on the question of unmarried and or strict parents. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
hi, first-time caller.
Welcome.
A bit of a hero of mine, so excuse the nerves.
Oh, how kind. Thank you.
But yeah, I was brought up just by my mum, so I'm 44 now.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, she met my dad at work. I didn't really have much to do with him, but she always made clear that she wanted me, and she was a strict parent. I think because she was unmarried, and the way people viewed it back then during the Thatcher years and Major years, it was she had a lot of scrutiny, a lot of twitching curtains and things. So I was always, from an early age, brought up to be very respectful. You know, if something went on, whereas other parents would be, "Oh, what's the matter, darling?" So, "What have you done?" Do you know what I mean? It was always that kind of. She was always quite hard on me.
So she was conscious of the stigma as well, then, as as you.
Yeah. I mean,
sad, isn't it?
But I mean, she did her best. I mean, when I was 8 years old, she bought a house, and she worked every day of her life. She passed away 4 years ago, but she still. I mean, we were so close.
I don't know if what I'm hearing doesn't sound strict. It sounds loving and firm.
I think people used to see her as strict. Right. I mean, I used to think she was strict, but getting older, I see what that did for me, and you know, the kind of respect and compassion and those kind of like.
They're lovely values qualities to have had instilled in you, aren't they? I love how you've knitted the two together, because I hadn't thought about the possibility of a slightly stricter role in parenting coming from the stigma of being a. But were you surprised to hear the caller who was 34 talking about stigma? Did you, as a 44-year-old man, were you surprised to hear that she felt it pretty much as keenly as you did?
Well, you think it would go away. I still remember, I think it was during the Major years, John Redwood being, again, the similar kind of Tory rhetoric. I've been quite critical of unmarried mothers, and I think that's the first time I felt a fire in my belly about sort of, the Tory government. I thought, hang on a minute. Don't tar us all with the same brush. And I remember, Mum came home, and I was like, what's he saying?
You've seen this reptile on the telly, Mum? Come and listen to this. What do you think about that?
So yeah, and I think that's kind of where I started to think, hang on a minute. Yeah, so, it doesn't surprise me.
It's definitely improved, but it was interesting to hear that it still lands. Because, I mean, now if it's a majority, so a majority of pregnant women are now unmarried, then theoretically the stigma should disappear entirely. But thank you, James. You did your mum proud. 12:46 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. And before I introduce you to this week's full disclosure guest, there's just a quick word on the moral panic that they're trying to create around transgender children. I'm just going to read you something that might put it into perspective, somewhat lacking from the usual suspects in the right-wing media. I taught for over a decade. In my first year teaching, a girl I taught got caught kissing another girl behind the gymnasium. She begged our admin not to tell them it was a girl, just to say that she got caught kissing someone. They refused, and the next day she came in with a swollen jaw. So, although at first glance not telling parents things about children may seem to be unfair or unjust, there are very well thought out reasons behind safeguarding. It's the opposite of how it's being reported in the Times, for example. Safeguarding is to not tell parents. Just think about, I was looking at some of the homophobia that the Sun used to publish. Someone had put it together as a reminder of what Paul O'Grady was dealing with when he was growing up and coming to prominence. There was a vicar who said he'd kill his own son if he was gay and stuff like that. So there's a reason why sometimes schools safeguard a child by not telling parents about what a child is doing. I thought that was really obvious, but some of the coverage has made it clear that either it's not obvious or there's something more sinister going on. I mentioned that in passing. I turn your attention next to a wonderful woman called Lucy Easthope, who is, well, you discover in the interview what the full job description is, but loosely described as a disaster planner, which means that if something terrible happens in the United Kingdom or anywhere in the world involving British people, like a plane falling out of the sky or a terrorist attack or a huge fire like Grenfell, Lucy's job is to minimise the negative impacts for the survivors and for the bereaved. I can't actually put it into words, and luckily I don't have to, because she's written a book called When the Dust Settles, which is formed the basis of my invitation to her to come on to Full Disclosure. And this is one of those examples where, because we've interviewed so many very famous people on Full Disclosure, we get to use the audience we've built up to bring attention and to shine a spotlight on people who aren't very famous but have got absolutely incredible stories to tell. And Lucy fits very much into that category. So here's a little taster of this week's Full Disclosure.
With something like the pandemic plans, that was a complete lie. Those first few months,
I fell for this. I fell for this.
I know, and I feel very grateful, and obviously you address it in your writing, for people who are willing to listen, and that was really important to me. I tried. Twitter was such a good tool for me to sort of say, hang on, there are, I started with just, there are plans, and of course at that point there was this kind of global conspiracy stuff about there's a plandemic, and I had to sort of learn how to tweet to not create this idea that I was saying there was a terrible conspiracy. But what I was saying is there's very little new here. What to do with schools, what to do with education. We'd looked at this. This was our lives. We're pandemic planners. We'd worked so hard on this. And then we were, in the same way as people who had, big PPE factories were told not to ring the number. It wasn't for them. The pandemic planners were told, your stuff isn't quite right. It's not what we need. We're thinking out the box. We've got friends we want to hire. And it went from there, really.
So there's two things going on there. There's this incredible arrogance in the heart of Downing Street. That's the right word, I think. Yeah. But there's also presumably a degree of self-interest in camouflaging and disguising how much had been allowed to wither on the vine since 2012. So it suits their purposes for this to be some absolutely unprecedented, utterly unpredicted event, partly because they've got rid of all the work that was done in dealing with with it coming along, and then you've got the Johnson-Cummings axis where they honestly thought they could, I don't know, Sudoku their way out of it or something like that.
And I think also when you train well, and I do believe, I think, I had some very good dealings. I was adjacent to, I never worked directly with Theresa May, but I had good dealings with colleagues who worked directly with her. I think if you had prime ministers or ministers who were willing to spend some time being briefed on the horror of some of the scenarios we worked
which involves acknowledging that you're not the best informed person in the room.
Yeah. And also, we got to the point where we would be told that they didn't read briefings. So if you could keep it to 2 or 3 lines, so you couldn't put in an evidence base. You couldn't explain why. So a lot of what we do doesn't make sense without context and case studies. But one thing that I think people were very horrified by the numbers. They didn't understand the modelling. They saw words that we were using. They saw case fatality rate, and I think that extended actually to the cabinet. I think there's a weekend.
Sure
it's that apocryphal weekend where the Cummings whiteboard. Who do we save? Yeah. And when you put it on an episode of the television, it looks horrible, but on a news programme. But it's a triage question.
Yes.
And it's what we designed the ethical framework for. So there's a pandemic UK ethical framework, was that we would have to target resources. Now, nobody wants to see those days, but certainly if this had been a high consequence infectious disease as it appeared to be in early March, we would be asking senior clinicians in the country to make triage discussions. And instead of engaging with that training and going into that, what they appeared to do was then go, that's not the pandemic we're going to have. Yes. We're going to have a different one where we win.
and that's not the pandemic that's going to be reported in tomorrow's newspapers.
No. And so
that will be the pandemic that we're going to win, like a game of tennis. You remember when Cameron said, I've said, just talking not about the pandemic, but about Johnson's own infection. He said, he'll be fine. I've seen him play tennis.
Yeah. Some of my colleagues write about this brilliantly, the rhetoric of the fight at this point. Yeah. And so the emergency plans are for wusses. My kind of plan. Well, how defeatist is that? Yeah. We're going to have a no-death pandemic, and then they just unleash hell on us.
Blimey, that ended quite portentously, didn't it? So it is just fascinating. Download it and buy her book, When the Dust Settles, by Lucy Easthope. I'm short of time, and it's such a serious topic. I'm reluctant to squeeze Sue into the time available, but I shall try to do so gracefully. Sue, what made you pick up the phone on the parenting questions?
I think because... good afternoon, James. Hello, I've not spoken to you before.
Oh. A lot of that about today.
I'm 60-year-old, and I am still living with things that happened to me when I was a child.
Because your mum was so controlling?
Very controlling. Still now, whatever's on my plate, I have to eat.
Really?
I can't leave anything. Yes, I still can't do that. At 12-year-old, she had an argument with my dad, and my dad and I were very close. And I had hair down to my bum, and she took me to the hairdressers, and they held me down to cut my hair to my ears.
Oh.
And I still, for 20 years, I haven't been to the hairdressers.
Oh, that's
still,
brutal.
Someone has to hold me down to have the ends cut.
Oh, are you serious? You poor thing.
Absolutely serious. I cannot. For me, it equates to going to the dentist to sit in a chair.
Of course it does.
And my daughter is getting married, a big, big wedding next year, and I have to go for a trial run to a hairdresser's with 3 people to hold me down to try and have my hair done.
Oh, crikey, Sue. You poor thing.
That literally is it. So, and I'm 60.
And it's still there. It's still haunting you.
It stays with you. And I was such a different parent.
I bet you were.
Such a different parent. I left home at 15. I got into a car, left home, and lied about my age and got a job at Aqua Scruton, where the Queen buys her clothes.
Oh, you worked there?
Yeah, did you?
Yeah.
And I got there, and at 15, I was travelling and living in a bedsit and travelling to Regent Street by myself.
Yeah, number 100.
Oh, wow, yeah. Gosh.
When were you there? What years were you there then?
Gosh, that would be 79.
Oh, all right. Yeah, you're a tiny bit older than me.
I was older than you, my dear.
Prep school. Have you ever talked to anyone about that? About Mum? About the
No, I haven't.
Might be worth it.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, apparently she tried to kill me twice.
Because little you needs looking after. That's what I learned in therapy, was you need to look after little you. Because you can look after your daughter. You've clearly done a cracking job with her, but no one's ever looked after you.
Well, I've got 3 children, one of that's got special needs, and they told me he was never going to drive or work or anything, and now he drives, he has his own business, Yeah, so,
good for you.
Yeah.
Well, I like the happy ending, Sue. I like the happy ending, but that's just something that occurred to me when you were talking about that hairdressing experience, is that you put an arm around your 12-year-old self and tell her that she's safe now, and that you're going to look after her, and it can have an amazing impact emotionally and mentally. It did for me. Thank you, Sue. Take care. We can compare notes on outfitting the gentry on another occasion. That's it from me for today. Don't forget about Global Player, the whole show podcast, Mystery Hour, all sorts of radio shows, the world's biggest podcast. So download it from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. Sheila Fogarty with you now. Sorry, I'm very late today.
Are you? I hadn't noticed. It's only a few seconds. We'll live. We'll live. It's Friday. You are forgiven. 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 You are forgiven.